And we're off!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Last Life podcast. I am here with my good friend Corvus. He's chilling here. And I'm Matt, MML.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah, and today is a very special day because we have our first Last Life podcast guest in the form of your boy Chariot Rider. Say hi, Chariot Rider.
Hey, it's your boy. That is literally the word you used to describe me. But I am the boy.
He is
two-wheeled, horse-drawn chariot lad that is known as Chariot Rider.
That is exactly what you are. You also happen to have the exact same name as my favorite, because I had a music minor in college, and you have the exact same name as my music professor in college. When I first met you and you joined my Discord server,
Yeah,
you had me
Alex.
look over a script, and I get an email saying Alex, last name redacted, wants to share a file with you on Google Drive. I'm like, why does this teacher want to share me something? I've already graduated. I'm so confused. But then I figured out what was going on, and it was a good time.
Yes.
He's figured you out.
Yeah, it was all good.
You've never seen me and your music professor in the same room at the same time.
That's true.
You never know.
What do you know about music theory?
Well, I was in a jazz band. I play the trombone. So
Oh, snap.
I know a little bit of music
You have
theory.
your trombone here?
I do have it in the background. I could bust it out and...
Yeah, bust it out. Play some.
No, you don't have to.
No, you have to.
Well, I wouldn't want to blow my cover, or anything.
No, of course. Do you own a kilt?
I do not own a kilt. I am not Scottish in any way.
All right, but see, either that's the cover, or you're not the same person, because I swear on my final day in it was Music Theory 2, this dude comes in in full Scottish garb, full on kilt, whole situation, and then he just straight
hot,
with
dude.
the black shiny buckle shoes that the whole I don't know, it's just the whole plaid everything. It was just the full works, hat included.
Yeah, I'd shine his shoes any day.
So okay,
Let me in on those suckers.
so now that we've verified that you are in fact two different people, what do you do on your YouTube channel?
Well, I do a lot of stuff on my YouTube channel. I mean, I don't know if you could say there's a through line for my channel, aside from I generally talk about indie games, but even that isn't consistent because I also talk about...
That did pretty well.
Well, it's literally my most popular video. It has 300 some thousand views. It's the one thing most people know me for, but that was my second ever video essay, and it's the only one that's gotten massively popular.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. My most popular video is not good, but your video actually was good. So
I'm gonna bring up your channel here.
So yeah, I talk about a bit about
video?
everything. I talk about narrative design, mechanical design. I'll probably be doing a video on strategy game design at some point in the future. I'm going to talk about heuristic trees and some other fun
Are you doing
stuff.
more real-time strategy or turn-based?
I'm more of a turn-based guy. I grew up playing competitive chess. So I did that for several years. So I have a lot of experience just sitting down at chess tournaments. And chess tournaments are pretty intense. You've probably never done one, but sitting there right in front of your opponent, especially if you have a speed clock, which you would in a competitive setting. You're just sitting there hoping that they don't see what you're doing, and you're hoping that you can notice whatever their devious scheme is. You see someone make a weird move, and you're like, what's up with that? And then you'll sit there for 5 minutes figuring it out, and then you'll just realize, oh, it was just a dumb move, and then go on with the rest of your game. So yeah, I grew up playing competitive chess, and so naturally I tend to play a lot of turn-based strategy games.
Nice.
So that's more of my skill set. However, we can get into what I've been playing a bit later, because I have been playing some real-time strategy games that I would like to talk about.
Yeah, of course.
Ooh.
But we can save that discussion for later.
Oh, is one of them Pac-Man?
One of them is not Pac-Man, unfortunately.
I mean, you could say it is like kind of a real-time strategy situation when you're good enough at Pac-Man to be like, okay, I know the ghost's behavior. But then it's sort of like just a bad real-time strategy game, because you just kind of know what to do.
Yeah, because once a strategy game, once you know the optimal strategy, it's a terrible game. It's why we don't like tic-tac-toe, because we all know the best way to play tic-tac-toe. And, the professional Pac-Man players, they all know, like, there's one direct way where you can, like, move Pac-Man in a specific way, and you're guaranteed to be safe every single time, because the ghost behavior is deterministic. So there's, like, nothing to throw you off your game.
Right.
So at like super high levels, it just gets to be doing the same thing hundreds of times to get the perfect score.
Yeah. What was that thing? I remember seeing a thing or reading a thing or something where like the real like best way to play tic-tac-toe is to actually play 3 tic-tac-toe matches at the same time, and you can play one move on any given board.
Oh,
that sounds cool.
Well, like, okay, I've seen a lot of variations of tic-tac-toe. The one, our people, because it's sort of a folk, these like tic-tac-toe spin-offs, they're sort of like folk games where like everyone has their own weird variations. The one that like, we played in high school whenever we were bored and had literally nothing else to do, we would have, the 9x9 or the 3x3 grid. But in each of them, there would be another tic-tac-toe grid. So then you could play in any of those, and then if you win, you get to turn it to your, either X or circle.
For the bigger game.
Right. So it's like 9 games at the same time. So I guess that one is even more intense. Game.
That's pretty good.
But I guess you could still just draw in every single game. I don't think it solves the problem completely. I think it just pushes it back a little bit, and not even that much. Tic-tac-toe. It's a very interesting thought experiment game. I find that I cite it in like a weirdly high number of my videos, but the ones talking about strategy games at least. But it's an awful game, but it's very good at teaching, what you shouldn't do in a game.
Yeah. Did you ever play the dot game where you had like the dot grid and you just draw a line and your goal is to like make complete boxes?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember what that one's called, but I did play that a couple of times.
Yeah,
I completely forgot about that existence.
Yeah, I used to work at a golf course, and so when we were like really bored, like when there was like 2 golfers out on the course, we just had to wait for them to come back. Like my coworkers and we would literally just set up those kind of games and just like the dot game, and that would just be the whole thing. So it was nicely set up because you had the scorecard already, so it was just like kind of blocked out in a way. But
nice.
Anyway, I was just thinking about that when we were thinking about tic-tac-toe. But all right. So you're working. Are you working on the strategy video now, or is that just like down the line?
Well, so it'll probably be a little bit down the line. So currently, I'm doing another narrative analysis video. I actually sort of hinted at what this video would be at the end of my Night in the Woods video, where I threw up, footage of Deltarune. So, the cat is out of the bag that I will be making Deltarune. A video about my crazy crackpot Deltarune theory.
Just a theory, a game theory?
This is so weird to write because I feel like Matt Pat, but not as bad.
Oh, yeah. Please be better than game theory.
Well, I feel like game theory's problem is he's too concerned with, like, what literally happened. And, okay, well, what is this person's relationship? And how is, like, the multiverse set up in the Undertale Deltarune continuum? How does that literally connect to each other? But, my theory is more of like a thematic,
Right.
looking at, okay, what is this trying to say? What is Toby Fox trying to do with Deltarune?
And he's clearly trying to say that Chris was Ness the whole time.
Oh man, it's Deltarune. It's been like a ghost. It's haunted me. Well, so I played it, and initially I was not sure what to think of this game at all. I'm like, what is up with, I'm fine with all like the, Ralsei and Susie stuff, all that's new and interesting. But then like, what's up with this whole like, you have no choice thing? Like, doesn't that sort of like contradict like, what was in Undertale, which obviously like this is the first chapter. So I have a feeling he's going to subvert stuff he says in the first chapter. So maybe like your choices do matter, but I don't know. But we'll see how that pans out. But my theory, if you want a little sneak peek into what I'm talking about, this is actually more of like a meta thing. So Undertale, it was sort of about, it had all of its stuff about mercy and stuff, but it was also sort of a commentary on games and how people played them, especially in the genocide route. And I think Deltarune will continue the tradition of commentating on how people play games. And so my theory is sort of along those lines, where Chris is like the player avatar, right? He's your vessel, your puppet that you can control, and he does what you want. If you want to kill everything in your path, he will kill everything in your path. And if you want to spare everything, he will spare everything. But, the game makes it clear that Chris is his own person. It hints to a life that he had before the game. And there are some other lines, that sort of, at the beginning, it talks about, it has you go through this whole thing of making a vessel, and do you want what hair do you want, and what shirt, and so. But then it's like, you don't get to be the person you made. You are Chris in this universe, and that is very important in my opinion. And so then you get to the ending where it's like, oh man, why is he ripping out his soul? And you could say, oh, well, we just don't know the answer to that because the rest of the game will answer that. And I think it will. But I think at the moment, my theory is that he's like rebelling against the player. Because, the soul is like, it it's a symbol of the player's agency, right? When you're moving around, you like in the battles, you're represented by the heart. It represents where you are on the map. And actually, a weird detail in the final scene, when he throws the heart into the cage, you can still move around. So you still have like agency, but you're not controlling Chris anymore. You're controlling the soul. So it's like Chris is ripping out your agency, and he's decided that it is time for him to control whatever's going on. Maybe he's a bit angry at the player because, who'd want to be a puppet for someone else? Just imagine if you're just living your life and then suddenly your choices don't matter anymore. You see it all ties together. Because his choices didn't matter. It didn't matter what he thought. It only matters what the player thinks. But
my whole theory was that because I was thinking along the same lines after I'd played the game. So I'm sorry, like I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, or maybe you do say in the video and you shouldn't say anything. So cut me off if you want. But my thought process was like, okay, Chris like literally like tears the heart like the player out of him and then throws him in a cage. My curiosity is like, oh well, maybe you won't be playing Chris for the whole game. Maybe it's like chapter 1 you're playing as Chris, and then the next chapter you're playing as a different character, or controlling a different character, and then see how they rebel against you or something like that. Because it's broken into distinct chapters.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's a good point.
I have no idea how like the story is going to continue. Like in terms of predictions, like it's
Yeah,
just
it's
such a
difficult to
crazy
predict.
cliffhanger that, does the soul re-enter Chris? Like, is this something he does often, or is this a one-time thing? Or like, I have
Right.
no idea. So
And the whole story, like outside of that, is like pretty well self-contained.
yeah, it all like wraps up, and they say like, oh well, we should come back tomorrow, but that's like the only lingering
Yeah.
thing, and that's like, clearly, setting it up for like a chapter, like, okay, you go back, every day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some unanswered questions, obviously, but it's very self-contained.
Yeah.
It's why I feel comfortable making a video about a demo, essentially.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because there's enough I can analyze there, and it's
Yeah, I mean that's what I did.
Yeah, you made the
I mean, 'cause-
Deltarune video too.
Yeah.
Yours
Yeah.
is more mechanical, less narrative focused.
Yeah.
about like the battle
Yeah.
system.
So
What are you working on?
yeah, because basically Deltarune didn't learn from Undertale in terms of mechanical design. It looks prettier and it's more streamlined, but interacting with the enemies is so one-noted. There's no choice involved like there was in the first game. I'm not talking about genocide and pacifism. I'm talking about actually interacting
Right.
with the characters.
And I remember Toby Fox, like when he released the demo, he made a whole like statement that sort of like parroted a lot of what you were saying in your video. He's like, I'm like not fully satisfied with this demo because of the fact that I have these mechanics in Undertale that don't mean anything. But maybe
Right.
he's saying that as like
Yeah.
a setup for something that he's going to do later. But like it's hard to say.
Yeah.
But Yeah.
Toby Fox is a weird, unpredictable developer. He could do anything. So, I have no idea.
Yeah. And yeah, the narrative, like you were saying, where the player is controlling Chris and then Chris rips the player out, that's definitely the direction he's going. I don't think there's a doubt with that.
yeah, it'll be interesting where
Yeah, so I'm very curious to where he goes with that.
and I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
your video. Given that
It
your
should
Night
be
in the Woods video was
interesting.
very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, I hope like I'm not stating the obvious. Like this is one where like my self-doubt is definitely creeping in, where I'm like, am I just saying like the really obvious stuff, or am I like breaking new ground here? Because I haven't seen many people talking about this whole player Chris relationship, so I don't know how many people picked up on it.
Right.
Like,
I don't know. I picked up on it, but at the same time, like some people may not. So
yeah.
yeah, so it's always a bit of a fear that I'm just stating the obvious with these narrative analyses. So
well, like for me, I think the key detail is the cage where you can still move the heart.
Yeah.
Because I actually missed that for the first time, and then I read that online, and I'm like, okay, that's what solidified the player thing for me. That detail that I missed.
But a lot of people probably missed it.
probably.
Yeah, I'm probably not the only one who missed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what have
I
you
wasn't
been
really
working
paying
on, Matt?
attention to the cage.
Oh, I was gonna ask Corvus first, but I mean I can go next,
Oh.
I guess. Doesn't matter to me.
Oh, I mean,
Me?
Cool. So I guess this past Sunday, as of recording, which will probably be like a little bit, maybe a week or more ago, I released my video about Thomas the Tank Engine, which
Which was very good.
Choo choo.
yeah. I like the, I'm sort of the weird outlier of the lastlife.net situation because most of my stuff isn't gaming, but then I do drop the hot gaming take every now and again. So I'm really
Matt, where are your gaming videos, Matt? Why aren't you working on games, Matt?
well, as I'm not gonna say anything, for sure, because I don't know what will come out first, but there might be some gaming related situation that may have something that I'm involved with on Last Life and YouTube, around the time of the release of this podcast. But that's all I'll say, just in case the podcast is first. So anyway, when Thomas' video came out, But now it's just sort of like I'm not sure what I'm doing next because I have a bunch of different scripts that are sort of in limbo.
Right.
The one that's games related is a script about Ghost Trick that I've been working on for almost a year at this point. Mostly just because, I've been slowly working through the game. I've actually I have a DS emulator on my smartphone, and I've been playing through it that way because that gets me the cleanest footage of it. And having the stylus is nice because I have a Galaxy Note, so the stylus is nice. As opposed to like weird mouse controls on a computer or something.
I've been using mouse with Ghost Trick, and it's like a stylus. It's really easy.
I'm sure.
I mean,
it works.
I'm not recording.
Yeah, for recording, I that was what my main concern was.
So
yeah,
I just played the
didn't
iOS
record,
version
so.
because from what I had seen, it was just the same stuff.
Yeah.
It just the mechanics were a little bit it didn't give you all the details that you would have gotten on like the DS version.
The main difference between the iOS version and the DS version is the DS has a whole top screen of information where the iOS version just kind of puts it on one side. But you're not really missing out on much. I feel like both versions are pretty much equal. The reason why I wanted to do the DS version anyway is because, one, that's the version I played. And two, I don't have an iOS device, so I was like, okay, well, I'll just record the DS version. And I got the DS emulator on my phone, had the ROM already. I don't remember what I got it for originally because I first played the game when I got it physically. But I had the ROM already, so I just put it on my phone, and on Android for whatever reason, or at least the Samsung Androids, the Game Center situation automatically has screen recording built into it. So I just like booted up the emulator and then just hit screen record, and then it just works and gives me an MP4 file. So I've been slowly working through the game because I want to talk about a bunch of specific scenarios throughout the game because it's sort of a mix of how accessible the game is, how it's so good at just like, because it's just a touch-based game. For the most part, it's very intuitive, a lot of the things, and it can still be challenging and like thought-provoking. It's not easy through its accessibility. It's just accessible because it's just such a simple concept.
Right.
And then I want to take that, and I also want to basically talk about how it's such a really cool story and how it builds throughout the entire game. So just as like the mechanics are building, but because it's such simple mechanics, you're spending all this time thinking about the story and what's going on, and all these little tiny details you pick up that make the twist at the end like so powerful and potent. But I think it's just, I want to talk about these specific scenarios, so like I don't want to miss anything, so I've been taking my time with it.
Right. I mean, especially with a game that's so character and story driven.
Absolutely.
Well,
and
and
it's
it
just
like ties.
I was just gonna say, it's just a game I love so much, so I want to do it right.
Right.
Ghost Trick is so good. Like, it was my favorite detective game just because, everything, it presents an actual interesting mystery. It's like, okay, you have all these clues that you theoretically could put together on your own, but you really, it goes through the story and you figure out what's really going on. But it's still, like, right up to the very end, it's pulling out new things, and but it all ties together and everything is explained. Like there's some places where you go and you're like, oh, what am I doing in a diner? And you just like go there for like 2 seconds, and then you come back there later in the night, and it's like, oh well, so all these characters are somewhat important as well, even though they were just in the background before, and everything comes full circle, and it's great.
It's really good because like a lot of the detective games that have more like sci-fi and like non-realist elements, if that makes sense, like they sometimes risk the problem of just being so nonsensical and fantasy based that like you could never figure it out. Where like here the rules are so consistent that yes, you won't know everything at the start of the game, right? Because there are just things you don't understand about like how you're a ghost and can do tricks and all that. But once it's explained and you understand how that works, then the logic of that can be used to figure everything else out.
Right. It's a very good detective game. It was my favorite. It was only supplanted by Return of the Obra Dinn, but that's also a very different game, so I don't feel right comparing them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hardly comparable.
Obra Dinn makes you the detective, but Ghost Trick takes you through a detective story.
Exactly. That's the best way to put it.
So they're very different, and they were trying to do different things. And I don't want to compare them, but in terms of like detective games, I feel like I have to give it to Obra Dinn just because it makes you the detective, and you have to think through, how did this guy die, and who killed him and stuff. But both of these games are great. You should play both of them.
Yeah, Obra Dinn is I would say is a better detective game because the objective of the game is to figure things out. Where in Ghost Trick, it's a puzzle game in a detective story, and it's a really good puzzle game, and it's a really good detective story.
Yes.
I recommend Matthew Matos's video on Obra Dinn.
Oh yeah, that video was really good.
True.
He's probably my favorite channel.
He's definitely one of the greats.
He was my inspiration. I feel like he's the inspiration for a lot of different people.
Well, yeah, just writing wise, like,
yeah,
I would say most people struggle with writing, and so having someone to, I guess, kind of an example is not a bad thing.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
So yeah, I've been working on the Ghost Trick script. I've been working on a script about. I was actually talking to Corvus about this while Alex was figuring out his audio. But I'm working on a script. I was working on a script about Kanye West for a while, but that script has since changed to be a comparison of a specific Kanye West album with a different album, and I won't say what it is because I feel like if I say it, it's sort of like, I don't know, ruin some of the surprise of it, because I feel like it's a weird comparison, but it's sort of, I hope that the examination itself sort of reveals something about how we like look at music. So I'm hoping it goes a little bit meta, which I like those kind of ones.
Meta's fun.
So I'm looking forward to that. And then sad news came out today or like yesterday that one of my favorite Netflix shows, Tuca and Birdie, is not getting a second season. And I'm really disappointed by that because the first season was fantastic. It's by a lot of the same people that made BoJack Horseman. And so I've been, this is before that announcement came out, but I've been working on a script about BoJack Horseman and Tuca and Birdie. The script started as just a BoJack script, but I think when I watched Tuca and Birdie, which is a much more spontaneous show in its execution, it's very bright, it's very nonsensical, but it's nonsense. It's nonsensical for a reason. It's nonsensical because there's a focus on the anxiety of the here and now, as opposed to BoJack, which is much more about the existential dread of like everything that happened before right now, like all of this regret and all of this thing you have to reflect on. So BoJack focuses much more on reflection, where Tuca and Birdie's much more spontaneous and like here and now, in the moment kind of stuff, and only sits to reflect really in the 9th episode. So I'm working on a script about that as well.
Do we know why they're dropping the show?
I think it's just numbers. I think that the show reviewed very well, but ultimately, like Netflix,
but nobody knew about it.
Yeah, people didn't know about it. Like Netflix did a really good job at marketing it. Like I was in Times Square like a few months ago, and they were like full of like billboards and stuff about Tuca and Birdie because they wanted it to be another BoJack Horseman. But I think that I think one, Netflix is oversaturated with a lot of shows. When BoJack came out, Netflix was younger. I think for one, and I think two, even BoJack had a pretty slow burn to start, and I think Netflix is less willing to give a show a chance with the second season, because I don't think BoJack would have made it into season 2 if it started, this year, because BoJack's first season is pretty bad for the first 6 or so episodes. So I think it's just a product
I
of
wish they would.
2019.
Yeah, I wish they would give it a chance at least.
Yeah. That's just the nature of media production. Is sometimes good things just don't pull in the views, and then they get cut. And that just it happens in games, it happens in film, it happens in television. I don't know if it happens in literature, in books. But
you know what's really surprising? That it didn't happen to Nier Automata, and it got universal praise and popularity.
Yeah.
I did not expect that, and I'm very happy.
Well, I'm still waiting for my Half-Life 3. I have a feeling that it's not coming, and if it is coming, it's going to be a VR game, and I won't be able to play it. So I'm very sad.
And it probably
with
won't
the
be
state of
like the real
Half-Life.
Half-Life 3. It'll probably be like some spin-off or something.
Yeah, well,
It'll probably what they did with Banjo and Conquer, and just put them in random crap that doesn't make any sense.
and do
Yeah.
you guys keep up with Valve news at all?
No,
somewhat.
they don't do anything.
Well, so essentially, people go through and they
Auto-chess.
go through the game files of all their other games, and they find strings because it's all in the same engine. So they find strings relating to other games, and so people have been finding a lot of HLVR strings.
Yeah.
So, I wonder what that could be referencing. But that's the only new game from them that we really have any information on is whatever this HLVR project is. So
aside
obviously,
from the card game they dropped a little bit ago. I don't remember what year that was.
don't get me started on Artifact. That is just a tragedy. Talk about games that didn't pull in the players and got cut before their prime. Artifact is one of those games, and I'm deeply bitter about that. It should be doing better than auto chess. I do not like auto chess at all, but
Auto chess is garbage, dude. So I tried auto chess on my phone, of course. Played 3 games, won all 3 games, uninstalled it. And it's just the conclusion I came to was that it's the strategy is, hey, there's these classes of enemies that get bonuses if they're together. Okay, what classes do you get in the beginning, and can you work with them? And then it's just luck. For 90% of the game, it's just luck.
Yep. As the resident chess expert, I can confirm that this is a clearly inferior product. Actually,
It's
what you were talking about there, it sort of might tie in with what I'm going to be talking about in my strategy design video. I might be having a lot of videos on strategy game design because I feel like there's not enough strategy game design videos. But I'm going to be making a video talking about heuristics. And essentially, I feel that Dota Auto Chess has very poor beginner level heuristics because it just throws you in and you have no idea what is good and what is bad and how everything fits together. And it's just throwing you out into the ocean and you don't know how to swim, but it's telling you to get back, and you're just sort of drowning. It's just very messy. Whereas Artifact is much easier to keep track of. You have clear goals. You can say, okay, I dealt 3 damage to him. I just need to destroy either one of his things twice or 2 of them separately. And very simple goal, a lot like Magic. Just reduce their health to 0. Just a little bit more complex than that, and that really helps new players grasp. Okay, this card that deals damage. This is going to help me win. Whereas in Dota Auto Chess, you just look at everything. It's like, okay, well, why is this unit any better than this unit? They both deal damage, but I don't even know how they move or what they do, or it even took me a little while to figure out, there's combos between some of these units, where they have synergy, where they buff each other, but it's just a very weird game, and I do not get the critical acclaim that it has gotten.
Yeah, I mean, synergy is how you win. I played the original auto chess that came out, not the Dota or League spinoffs,
Right?
But at least in auto chess, I'm not sure about the others, but they make it clear, like in the top right, they give you a list of the classes and how close you are to getting the required number of those class units to get the benefit. And there's different like levels of benefit as well.
Right.
And yeah, and then you combine 3 1-star heroes to get 1 2-star, combine 3 2-star heroes to get, or 3 2-star heroes to get 1 3-star, and that each star is a significant power boost, and getting the required hero to get enough to get up to that 3-star is completely luck.
Oh yeah, like, there's some strategy
so
to
bad.
it where, like, how much do you want to spend re-rolling, but it pales in comparison to other strategy games where it's a lot more predictable. And even if they have random elements, you have a lot more control over those random elements, which makes it a lot more bearable, from a strategy perspective.
Yeah, in auto chess, outside of the first few rounds or whatever, you have enough money to just constantly be rolling in the shop as the battles are taking place. So you don't even have to pay attention to the battles. You just keep rolling until you find the stuff you want for the entire match. It's all random. It's all luck.
Yep.
And that's all you do. It's shop management, or it's shop refreshing.
Essentially,
That's all
that's what
it
it
is.
is. But, yeah.
Damn.
Is Matt still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry,
he
I've just
is.
been listening. I haven't played Dota Auto Chess, so I was just, hanging out, listening in
enough.
the background.
It's not worth your time.
It's not, especially when there's so many other games that everyone still needs to play.
Yeah. Games to play, indeed.
And the opposite of Nier Automata, where it went under the radar too much, I think, is Gravity Rush 1 and 2. You guys haven't heard of it?
No, I've heard of it. I haven't played it.
I've heard of Gravity Rush, never played it. Don't have much interest in playing it. I don't even know what kind of game it is. I just am familiar
Basically,
with the name.
you change the gravity around you, and it's pretty cool. I have the first game. I haven't finished it, but I know that Post Mesmeric is outspoken about how underrated, how undersold it was.
Yeah, I'll have to give it a try at some point, but I haven't played it, so I didn't have much to say. I don't really know much about it, but
yeah,
I
the
like
only
Gravity.
game
I
I've
have it
played
on the
with
mix.
flipping gravity is VVV. That game's great. You should play that game. That's the one that really went under the radar. That's
is
the
a
one that deserves your
fantastic
attention.
game.
You think?
Fantastic
Oh,
game.
I think that
fantastic
one's
soundtrack.
super popular.
Well, I guess I don't see a lot of people talking about it in critical discourse.
It's not.
Well, because it's a simple game, probably. It's one of those like flash platformers, even though it's good.
It's not really a Flash situation, but it's like it came from the earlier indie game era. Like it's in like the Super Meat Boy kind of era.
Yeah, like
so I think
the
when-
post Braid,
Right, yeah.
because Braid was the one that like
Yeah.
showed people, oh, you can make money off of these games, and so then a lot of other teams also sort of released projects around that time,
Yeah.
and people realized like, oh, you can do this thing for a living, and it was one of the earlier ones. So it got a bit of traction, but it was definitely not as big as like Limbo or Braid or Super Meat Boy or any of those early games.
Which is a shame because Terry Kavanagh makes great games. Super Hexagon
does.
is fantastic. I think now he's working on some kind of card game or something like that.
It's like Dicey Dungeons.
Oh yeah, that's
so
it.
it's like
Dicey
a dice
Dungeons.
game,
It's a dice game, not a card game.
which that looks neat.
Yeah, I don't know
a lot about it,
tons
though.
about it. But I mean, I just see updates about it every now and again. But that's cool. So what videos are working on, Corvus?
Oh, hey, what's up? Yeah, okay, so I started, for those who know me, I started a new series called Design Frame that the second episode should be out by now, but took longer than I intended, and I had to scrap one of the sections so it could be its own video.
Ooh.
Yeah. So that's going to be coming out next. There's not much I can say about that without spoiling what games I'm talking about.
Fair enough.
But I think the next project that I'm excited about is so I've been learning more about psychology, and so I've been able to what's the word? For lack of a better word, compare psychology or relate psychology to specifically Katana Zero and possibly Hellblade. I might stick in there as well.
Nice.
So the topics, this is going to be split into 2 videos I'm currently planning, but it's going to be related to paranoia and dread, and there's also dread, chaos. Chaos is a pretty big one, and along with chaos is complexity and the frame of reality. As so yeah,
That'll be fun.
there's a popular psychology term or phrase that's order and chaos. So it's pretty fascinating. Oh, and I recently played A Plague Tale.
Oh yeah,
I want to talk about that game as well, because it manages how people, or I guess the gradual progression of chaos through its both gameplay and story, actually, and character development. So I'm not sure how that video is going to come out, but
Certainly interesting.
I'm excited. I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely way out of my league, but I figure, hey, while I'm learning some psychology stuff,
Might as well.
it'd be cool if I applied it to something.
Oh,
Definitely.
absolutely. Like, psychology is great for, game design and just knowing stuff in general. Like,
Yeah.
I've done a couple psychology videos on, like, flow. It seems like everyone does a video on flow who talks about psychology at some point. But,
Yeah.
I've also talked about, some other more obscure psychology stuff. Like, the whole thing of, like, if you dress up like a, lab assistant, you'll, like, do better on, like, analytical tests. And it's, like, some weird psychological thing where, if you're dressing up and pretending to be something else, you act more like that thing. It's a very interesting effect. I have a video about it. But yeah, psychology is just super useful for a lot of things. So it's always...
It sounds related to how, like, having good posture and actually even dressing up, like, in a suit, for instance, for speeches and public presentations.
It's like the same, same... I'm pretty sure it's a part of the same theory, at least. But yeah, generally, how you perceive yourself affects how you act. And so...
And it's how others perceive you as well.
Yes.
If you dress up nice, other people are going to be like, oh, sexy man. Oh, please.
But,
Please, I want this sexy man in my life. Yes, I'm just going to keep going until you stop me. Oh, sexy man.
How's your Mario Odyssey thing going?
I was gonna mention, since you're talking about like flow and you looking into psychology, that's what I did for my episode 0 of Mario Odyssey series, where I talk about power moons as a reward system. I actually tried to find as much as I could about game design and reward systems so I could apply it to that video and as a precursor to the series, because I had to.
Oh, yeah.
Because, the common excuse all the fanboys are going to use is like, hey, this game is just not for you, man.
Right.
And so I want to establish the lens that I'm looking at this game.
Or the good argument of, oh, you don't need to get the bad moons. So it's like,
Yeah,
oh, well,
like,
just like,
Yeah, like, dude, it's in the game, and it's part of the collective that the game wants you to go for.
yeah, you don't
Like,
need to
if
play
you ignore
half
the
of
bad parts,
game.
this game is great.
Yeah, half of the game's really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you ignore most of the game, the most of the game is good.
Yeah, you only need to get some of the moons, so you could just ignore everything you don't like.
Yeah, what an idea.
Except there, even if you go with that logic, there's not enough good moons to fill out an entire playthrough. So
Yeah.
either way, you're sort of arguing on shaky ground.
If you don't play Yoshi's New Island, it's a pretty good game.
Wait, no, Yoshi's New
Yeah, on
Island?
the 3DS. This is a terrible game.
I have not heard of that one.
Yeah, it's made.
Must
Yeah, it's very not.
must be obscure for a reason.
Well, basically, like everyone was excited because it was like a new Yoshi's Island, and this is this is when Yoshi's Woolly World wasn't like back. It was like announced, and it was like, oh snap, what's happening to it? So people were like, okay, well, while we wait for this other Yoshi game, here's a new Yoshi's Island game. I'm like, cool, and it's like just the worst.
Oh, is this the one where like the soundtrack is like it sounds like it's performed by children?
Yes,
And like it's like kazoos
it's
and like
intentionally
it's really bad.
like not in time.
Yeah, I remember a GameScore fanfare. He mentioned that game in his video on Yoshi's Island and its
right.
music.
Yup.
And
Because it's
that
disgrace
little
compared to the
segment was
original.
all I needed to hear to know that this game was not that great.
Yeah, it's just like a complete misunderstanding of like what made Yoshi's Island the original so much fun. And like it's interesting because it's made by the development studio Arzest, who would later go on to make the critically acclaimed Pikmin game on the 3DS. But before that, what happened is that Arzest was formed from developers who used to work at Artoon. And Artoon basically closed, and then some of them formed Arzest. And Artoon made a bunch of Yoshi games in like the 2000s, including Yoshi's Island DS, Yoshi Touch and Go. I believe they also made Yoshi Topsy Turvy. And then all of those games they're not like the best game ever or anything, but they're like all pretty like they're enjoyable. Like I have fun with them. I especially like Yoshi Topsy Turvy. Like they're fun times. So it's really surprising that like people from that studio that go and make another studio like can be that wrong. But I don't know. Maybe someone likes it. So no, I was just making a joke because like Mario Odyssey, like half the game has bad moons, but like Yoshi's Island and Yoshi's New Island is like, oh, the whole game is bad, but if you ignore the whole game, it's a good game.
I feel like a lot of good games kind of set themselves up for failure with sequels.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of just franchisement in general, and I say that as someone that wants Super Mario 3D World 2. But I generally think like if you have like a really good idea and execute it well in like one game, and you don't have any other ideas that you want to share or express, then that's all I need.
Right.
If like Mario Galaxy 2 was a situation where like you read about the development history of that, and it's like literally they like made Mario Galaxy 1 and they're like, but we could do this and this and this and this and this and this, and it's like, okay, I understand why you made Mario Galaxy 2 then. But like a lot of other cases, it's like, oh well, the first one sold well, so we might as well make another one, but like we don't really know what to do with it.
Well, and I'm not a huge franchise person either, but I think that more comes out of me just like playing a lot of indie games, and indie games typically do not grow into franchises. So people who do like deconstructions of like, this 15, game franchise and comparing each game, that's not something I've ever really been a part of, because I play a game and it's just like all I get. There's a couple of indie sequels, like you can see from my Discord avatar. I'm highly anticipating Silk Song, the
Yeah,
Hollow Knight
Yeah.
sequel. But that's like, a very, I can tell they're doing a lot of new things. It's a completely different move set.
Oh, for
they're
sure.
changing the way like the progression works and how you like get new items. And,
it's also
there's
a thing
new
where
lore.
playable Hornet was like in the original Kickstarter. So it's
Yes.
like you can tell that was something they had an idea for, and then as they developed the ideas for fulfilling that Kickstarter benefit with a Hornet campaign, they just developed it into a full sequel.
Yes.
And so that's such an organic development process that I really like. But yeah, indie games are great. My best friend, who's coincidentally also named Alex and isn't you, unfortunately, Chariot Rider, haven't met you in real life. You don't. It makes it sort of difficult to.
You're
You
distant
know a
from
lot
that
of
person.
Alexes. It's sort of spooky.
Yeah, I do know a lot of Alexes.
Your music professor, this other
You're
dude.
gonna have to change your name.
Are you sure there's like not
How about,
one
like-
Alex that's just like every Alex in the world, and they're just like following you and studying you
possible.
for
Yeah,
weird
it's
reasons?
possible. It's the Alex hive mind.
Yes.
Hey, to avoid confusion, let's just call him Alexander.
Okay, fine.
Well, that's my
Alexander-
name.
Alexander the Great. He conquers a bunch of indie game. I'm kidding. But he's a huge indie game fan. So and to the point like he'll go through like back when Steam Early Access was a thing. He'd like go through the early access games and like if there was something he liked, he'd be willing to take a gamble on buying something in early access that I just plain wouldn't. And so like he's one of those people that like I'm trying to think of the name of the game that he was showing me recently that he's like straight up gonna be in the credits in because he bought the game so early in early access and then got in the game's official Discord and just like straight up messaged the devs and like suggested fixes and then they did it and so they wanted to put him in the credits because he like suggested fixes for a
Dang.
decent
Wow.
chunk of the game.
That's amazing.
Another one that he was in he was in super early for was Ark Survival Evolved, which obviously,
wow.
it has a
Oh,
reputation
no.
now for being a bit of a development mess, given how how it released DLC before officially releasing, and there being a lot of development problems there, but. At the end of the day, there was some solid mechanics there as it was being developed, and it did come out into a game that he's ultimately pretty satisfied with, even if their release strategy wasn't perfect. So I would say that's another example. Like he's consistently said that his favorite game of all time is a game called Natural Selection 2, which is the sequel to, I want to say it's a Counter-Strike mod.
That would make sense because it was developed by Turtle Rock Studios.
Yeah.
and they worked for Valve, so
Yeah.
like I'm familiar with this game. It sort of flew under the radar though.
Yeah. So he's all been all up in these like under the radar games, and it's always interesting, like because I'm the guy that's like playing the Nintendo games that come out, or like the specific like developers that I like I got Sekiro when it came out, or like I got Neo because it was interesting. So I get these like bigger titles, and sure, there's indie developers that I follow, but I don't like go dig that deep into it. So it's interesting when he's like, here's this really, really cool game that I found, and I'm like, but where did you find it? And he's like, I don't know, I just found it. And it's really cool. So like I'll get on the phone call, or I'll stop by, and like his computer just have like all these new games. I'm like, oh, what is this? And he got them for like $5 or whatever because they're early access, and they turn in these like big games.
Yeah, indie games are great.
They can be great.
Well,
Yeah,
that is very true. You don't see the bad ones for the most part.
that's very true.
Right, you just ignore the bad
you see
ones.
the cream of the crop ones for the
Yep.
most part. At least most people do. You know about Hollow Knight and Shovel Knight, and I'm sure there's another Knight game.
Night
Portal
in the
Knights. There we go. Night in the Woods. A lot of nights, but
That's cheating.
you don't hear about all those like average or subpar indie games.
Yeah.
They all sort of disappear into the background.
Yeah, and
Like I'm into indies, and even I don't play like those games it takes a lot to convince me to buy a game.
Yeah.
So I I do have my niche interests, and actually we should probably talk about what games we've been playing at some point. But
Yeah.
I do play fairly niche games from mainstream standards, but in terms of indie standards, I could go way more niche and
Definitely.
obscure. I'm like in the weird middle ground.
Definitely.
Right, but then you have to measure, is it worth it, when a lot of these are like, hey, let me just try this to make sure it's good before I play it. Although that's arguably the benefit, because then you might something that's legitimately good that you wouldn't have played otherwise.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
So there
it's
you
an
go.
interesting situation, and with like so many more indie devs and with it being so much more accessible to get into game creation now, it's interesting to see how that
It's
ecosystem
so much
has
more
evolved.
accessible.
And will probably continue to evolve over time, especially as like new PC storefronts crop up and like
Yeah.
and even like on like dedicated platforms, like the indie scene on the Switch when it launched is very different from the indie scene on the Switch now.
Right.
It was a similar story with the Wii U as well.
Yeah,
So,
indie history is very interesting. I've been thinking about maybe doing a video about like all the different phases of indie game, culture, because you had like all the really old stuff like Cave Story and Dwarf Fortress, which is like one dude who just programmed a game because he thought it was neat and he released it onto the internet, for free. And nowadays it's come a long way since then.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the other obviously indie thing that turned into mega hit was Minecraft, which I should have mentioned. I'm working on a script on Minecraft as well.
Nice.
Which
Minecraft. More like Mine Shaft.
I mean, there are mine shafts in Minecraft. There are abandoned ones.
Yeah.
They're pretty good. But
Okay, well.
but no, that video is gonna be interesting because I don't know. I don't like current Minecraft. I like old Minecraft, and I know that sounds like an old head kind of thing, but I think I have like more of a justification for it than like you might expect, and that's all I'll say. Because
Yeah.
I think Alex. Is
I
right, like,
definitely have my thoughts about Minecraft, but it would take a long time to get into those.
yeah, that'll be the next podcast where you're in. It'll be great.
Yes.
What have you been playing?
Well, I guess I can start because I've been playing I have this bad habit of ping-ponging between like 5 different games at one time, so I'm always like playing a ton of different things.
I straight up thought you were gonna say I've been playing a lot of ping pong recently, and I was gonna
No.
be like, okay, cool.
So
you should, dude. Ping pong's great.
So I'm going to start this off by talking about a good one that I've been playing. Have either of you heard of Darkwood?
No.
So
I have, and I refuse to play it because I'm not a horror guy.
so Darkwood is amazing. To describe it, it is essentially a top-down, think Hotline Miami perspective. But you're in a cursed Polish forest, and
Okay.
you are. Well, it's a survival game, but it is very atmospheric, and like I love like the world design, because it just is very weird and not normal, but it's also not like in your face trying to be super horrific, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not like jump scares. Like, actually it sort of sells itself on the fact that it is a horror game with no jump scares, and it leans more into the psychological,
Right, it's suspense.
there's a lot of, actually for being a top down game, it is very intense. Because I think it does the unknown very well, and I haven't finished the game, so maybe I'm jumping to conclusions that I shouldn't. But like, my second night, essentially, you're playing this dude, and you have like this little hideout, and so you want to be back there before night falls, obviously. I don't know what happens if you stay out in the night because I'm not brave enough to find out. But you want to be back in your base and just, you're sitting there and you have no light because it has a system where you can only see in a cone in front of you. So I'm just sitting in my dark house because I don't want to use any gasoline to light the lamps. And, I just was looking in this other room and there's just like this red glow. And like this weird sickly dude like with flies swarming around him, and he's like in a plague mask, and there's just like this dude in like this red glow, and he didn't do anything. He was just sitting there. And that was legitimately one of the most terrifying things I've encountered, because like I don't know how he got in, because there are other enemies and you can sort of hear them like opening up the doors or like crawling through your windows if you haven't boarded those up. And this guy, I don't know how he got into my house. And I'm like, okay, what is this guy doing here? Like, if I move close to him, will he like kill me? If I like ignore him, will he kill me? Like, I didn't know. And
yeah, the unknown is scary.
And exactly, like, maybe I could have figured out his patterns, if I played this game a gazillion times, but that first time, I just did not know what this guy did, and I haven't seen him since. It was a one-time anomaly. He just showed up, and then he was gone, and I haven't encountered him again.
Damn.
And also just, I should mention the art direction. If you look up, like, screenshots and stuff, this is, I've heard it described as, like, if H.R. Giger, instead of having a thing for, like, gears, he had a thing for trees. So it's like H.R. Giger tree horror. And it's a very unique aesthetic. It was made by a Polish studio. At least I think they're Polish. There's some sort of Eastern European thing. So they like lean into like the whole European fairy tale sort of thing. So like, all the characters, they don't have names, they have titles. It's the Wolfman, the Traitor, the Stranger, the Doctor. And so it sort of leans into like that dark fairy tale aesthetic, and I'm just loving Darkwood. I'm going to be making a video at the end of the year, sort of similar to the Games of the Year video that Lamhoot does. And I'm going to be talking a bit about my weird relationship with horror. And in that, I will probably mention Darkwood.
Nice.
But I'm gonna be going into some of the stuff about horror that really appeals to me, but not like most horror, but like this really specific niche on YouTube of like, YouTube web series horror. Stuff like Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, Pet Stop, all those things. And why I find those sorts of web series and games so fascinating. So yeah, Darkwood, it's great. I love it.
Awesome.
I would probably recommend it as one of the best horror games ever made.
I mean, I haven't finished it yet, so I'm not going to go that far, but
well, no, I haven't played it. I just know enough about it where it actually, like, of course, screw jump scares. The horror that works, it's well known, or should be, that horror that works is playing with the unknown. As soon as you see the monster, it can't be worse than what your imagination creates in your mind.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of other stuff I haven't even gone into.
Yeah.
Like the weird settings you find, and like, a guy just beating his head to the music in the background, and like the weird distorted, there's a lot of little details that, I could spend forever talking about in this game that make the world so weird and fascinating. But, I'm sure you guys have also been playing games, and I don't want to hog all the time.
No, you sold me on this, so I'm definitely going to check it out.
Definitely check this
I guess
game
it'd be
out.
more accurate. I guess it'd be more accurate if I said it's a required play for horror fans.
Yeah. Be awesome.
But I'm trying to get my point across, so...
Okay.
So yeah, I guess
cut that.
that's not the only
silence.
thing I've been playing. I don't know if you guys want to like talk about something first.
No, yeah. I want to talk about Mario Maker 2 for a bit
Sure.
because
I
that's
would love.
literally probably all
Yeah,
I've
sure.
been playing.
Yeah, talk about what you want, dude.
Nah, because it came out and it was a good time. I've been having fun with it. I got it like the day it came out, and the next day I was with Alexander. We're still going with Alexander, and we designed the first level that's on my thing called Two Roads, and it was super interesting experience because, and I think this is one of the cool benefits of the co-op level making in Mario Maker 2. The UI for it really dumb, kind of stupid. I wish they had done it better. But the neat thing about co-op level making is that it's this experience of just the concept of co-op level making, because like you can have different ideas or visions of what you want this thing to be, and you have different visions of what you want, like the design of your level, how you want to teach players things or show players things, and also how you want to test them. So I think so. It was a super interesting level that I don't think is perfect by any means, not even close. But it was a fun experiment for what it was, and it's it's an okay level. But I really enjoyed the experience of making that level. The UI for it's terrible though, because the second player is a completely different
Yeah.
item selection interface from the first player. It's just completely different. So if let's say
What? What do you mean?
basically the first player has a set of like wheels that basically you pull up the search icon with Y, and then you just point the stick in a direction to pick your item, and you can go between different pages of wheels with respective items. But the second player picks an item individually, one item at a time, on a little mini HUD situation, and it goes in order, I believe, from most frequently used item to least frequently used item.
What? Why wouldn't they keep the same format?
Well, I think the reason why they didn't do the wheels is because they didn't want both players to constantly pull up the big, like, full screen situation all the time. They wanted it to be that one player could put things down and the other player could select an item. But if they wanted to do that, then I don't understand why they didn't use the same interface for both players and then make that interface good.
Yeah.
Right.
But
at least
instead,
sort them out
that's
into
not
like
intrusive.
what their type is.
Yeah.
They don't have it by frequency. That's just a bad
I
move.
think it's by frequency. I don't know because I didn't use the Player 2 controller, but the way he was cycling through, it would go from like Goomba to brick to question block. Like it was weird. It was like weird stuff like that. So like there might be a better order to it. Like maybe it's like a list of the most frequent, and then it goes in the right order or something like that. But I mean, like when we'll keep going with Alexander, but it's like when he was looking for something, it was like a pain in the butt. Like it would be like a minute from to find the thing. So like I said, I haven't held the Player 2. Like I don't have the game open, so I could be wrong with how that interface works. But either way, just the idea of selecting things one item at a time for that Player 2 interface is just not good.
Right.
But it in some sense, like it forced us to talk through things more. So in this weird counter-intuitive way, it worked, I guess. But I wouldn't say that's a champion.
Basically, you made a bad situation work.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't say it's a good thing. But I haven't seen anyone say that the 2-player level maker was well done. But I think it's cool that you can do it.
Yeah. It's nice to have the choice at least.
Yeah, so that's the multiplayer in Mario Maker 2 that functions, and I like it.
That functions.
And
right.
now, multiplayer playing
the other
levels,
stuff that Nintendo can never get right.
I don't understand why you can't just play a level online with multiple people local co-op. If you want to play a local co-op situation for an online level, you have to download it first. But
that's probably because the online multiplayer lags so hard, it's one frame at a time, and Nintendo doesn't want to invest the time or money into being competent at any level.
I don't know. Because it's like...
I'll be right back. I'm going to the bathroom.
Yeah, that's fine.
Bring your mic.
Nah.
Oh. Well, if you insist.
Nah. No, that's just funny.
Stop awkward pausing when I say stupid stuff. You gotta continue.
I love the awkward pauses. I'll just cut out this whole like I'm gonna go to the bathroom and like talk about awkward pauses like this whole bit. Unless you want me to keep it.
No, our audience needs to see that we're human. Needs to hear, not see, but hear. That we're human.
All right, and I'll probably forget about it too. But no, so if you're like, because when you're going on the course world in Mario Maker 2 and you're going to like look for a level and you like hit play, I'm like, cool, I can play it. But if the second controller's there and it's chilling and it's connected and someone can play, I understand why it can't just be like hit the multiplayer option. You could do that in the core spot with downloaded levels, so why not just like it already has to download the level in some capacity to your console in order for you to play the game, right? It doesn't download it like officially and save it somewhere like it does if you're downloading a level to the core spot. But in order to, do things on the internet, there is some level of streaming or download situation that's happening. Data is being transferred. So if you can
memory.
So if you can have it so you can play a level that's online with one player and transmit one player's button presses and play the level and it's fine, then I don't understand why you can't just do that with two people when you can, instead of just downloading it to the... I just don't understand. To me, that's just like the most obvious thing that they just chose not to do for some reason.
Well, that's why I mentioned the multiplayer
the online multiplayer, which is...
Yeah, it's because they just... So to do local co-op online, you do have to consider the second player in terms of like online. Like you could have lag just playing single player if it was done that poorly, So adding a second player in just creates more work for Nintendo.
Yeah.
And we already know how incompetently the other multiplayer lag fests were implemented.
I don't know how that works. Like how the playing levels that are online works, whether it's actually streaming it the whole time or whether it downloads it and then just uploads your clear data to the server and just clears it for you. Like I'm not sure how it works. But the online multiplayer, like with connecting with other players, it's hot garbage. In the same way Smashes was, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Smashes was garbage. They didn't even try with Super Mario Party, although... Oh, right. I was going to plan on making a video on why that game is garbage. I should get back into that one.
Well, I mean, the entire Mario Party series has never rubbed me the right way. Probably because I play a lot of board games, and it pales in comparison to any modern board game. The whole roll and move style is it's like something that came about in like the early days of board games. Back when Monopoly and all those games were first being made and published. But then the Europeans figured out that hey, that's not a very good system, or at least not generally. And then they made good board games. And then, they all came over to America.
Yeah.
And blew everything in America out of the water, in my opinion. They're called Euro games. And it's a whole complicated things. Yeah. But essentially, Mario Party is not strategic at all, in my opinion. At least not in any meaningful way. I'm sure King K would disagree with me.
Well, that's the thing. Like, it's a random dice roll, right? So it's not that strategic, at least not at a surface level. But Super Mario Party had so much potential with the ally system and using different dice.
Yeah.
So like,
that was such a cool idea.
Shy Guy has a dice with 5 4s on it and 1 0, so you can just be consistent with your dice roll. Like, hey, there's something 4 spaces away. Do I want to use my normal 1 through 6 dice or my 5 4 dice so I can almost guarantee a 4 So there's strategy in that. The game kind of ruins it, but
Yeah.
they were going in a more strategic direction.
It definitely, like, I think in terms of designing a strategy game, you either had to go in all on the party side or all on the strategy side. It's very hard to find a middle in between place where you can fit both of them in. Because I feel like, adding more strategy elements to Mario Party doesn't really work because it's still going to be a very party focused game. I'm sure these dice add in a little bit of strategy, but it's not really going to appeal to strategy gamers or strategy board game players and they're not going to be appealed by these new changes, and they're not going to change their opinion of Mario Party.
I also don't think that's what Mario Party's trying to do.
No, it's definitely not. It's trying to appeal to like the party game market, and all those people, they probably don't care. They're probably fine with having a couple extra options, and so good for them. But it's not going to bring in any new strategy game players.
Yeah.
I'm right, but like even with avid Mario Party fans, it's like some of the games in the series are more like noticeably luck based, and that always like drags a Mario Party game down
Hidden
further.
block with a star in it, my guy. The best mechanic in the game.
Yeah, that's yeah. We're not gonna talk about that. But so adding a little bit of strategy, I'm not saying custom dice is like a game changer, but adding any amount of potential strategy, and in this case it's optional strategy,
right,
can work wonders for the game, I feel.
Oh, I'm sure it could. I'm just not sold on the whole Mario Party thing. Maybe that's just me being biased unfairly against this game.
Oh, there's a lot of bad ones though, so it's kind of difficult to find. Like even the good Mario parties are flawed, right, where they start rubbing you the wrong way, and then you kind of get sick of playing it.
Like it's just never been something that would appeal to me. Because I play. We talked before. I'm the chess guy, so
exactly.
Stuff like that.
Well, chess is also like memorizing moves for professional.
Yeah, which
settings,
that's
right?
something I definitely don't like about chess is the amount of memorization.
Kind of removes the strategy.
But now I'm sort of at the place where I'm playing all these other board games. Like stuff like Lost Cities or Citadels or Castles of Mad King Ludwig. All great games. And these are all very strategic games, and they have less memorization, but they still have very interesting strategy, and they're all very diverse. So I have all those games I can turn to when I want to play a board game. So I guess I wouldn't ever have a reason why Mario Party would be better than any of those games.
Right. I get that. Definitely get that.
Right, yeah.
With the people I play with, there's no reason why we would ever not play one of those games instead.
Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah,
Tabletop
good.
Simulator's
Haven't
fun.
played it in a while, but I should.
We recently, or me and Matt recently played
The Binding of Isaac 4 Souls.
Four Souls. That Binding of Isaac one.
Is it? Yeah.
With Draz and
Fendon.
Fendon.
But yeah, I bought that
remember.
card game. I backed it on Kickstarter. I never played it until the Tabletop Simulator, and I bought Tabletop Simulator just to play that. It was really fun.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna need to play it more, but it's interesting so far.
It's got some really good strategy to it. Yeah?
Well, now that you have Tabletop Simulator, I can introduce you to all those other games, which would be very interesting.
Heck yeah.
Definitely.
We were sort of talking about this Four Souls game, and again, I wasn't really sold on it. Again, maybe it's just me being biased against. So from the board game perspective, there are two main camps. There's the Euro games I mentioned earlier, but then this is their actual name, not just me being mean.
No.
The Ameritrash. That's the name that people call them.
About.
You know, so it's like the whole Ameritrash Euro game divide, and it struck me as a very Ameritrashy game. But there are good Ameritrash games. They're like combat like more conflict heavy games that tend to have a bit more randomness. You know, these grew out of like the old war games.
Yeah.
And like,
Absolutely.
you know, Magic the Gathering, you know, there's a whole lineage of those sorts of games. Whereas like these Euro games sort of grew out of, you know, Germany actually has like a very strong history playing good board games and like very different board games than Americans were playing. So they have like different perspectives on like what a standard board game would be. Like if you ask an American for like what the first board game they'd think of, they'd probably say something like Monopoly or Risk. You know, Risk is the strategy game, you know, for when you're feeling adventurous.
But it's even Germans, not. It's not really. That's the thing. It's
not. I hate Risk. Whereas the Germans, you know, they're more likely to say something like Catan, because, you know, the Euro game style is less heavy, you know, conflict. They typically are more economic focused.
Yeah.
So, you know, Catan is all about trading with others.
Absolutely.
And, you know, maximizing your economy and, you know, generally getting more points than your opponent. And there's a lot of variation on both sides. You know, I don't want to boil all these down into just, there's random and not random.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's way more complex than that. And, you know, there are good Euro games and bad Euro games, and there are good Ameritrash games and bad Ameritrash games. But my point in all of this is that Four Souls struck me as a game with some of the negative aspects of Ameritrash games without any real redeeming. From what I had heard, you know, I watched a review of it, and it just didn't seem, you know, it reminded me a lot of this game called Munchkin.
I've heard of it.
Which Munchkin is not a game I'm fond of. And once I made the connection, like, oh, this is a lot like Munchkin, where you have to get to level 10 in Munchkin, and you do that by defeating monsters, and you can play cards on other people's turns to like make them lose the combat. And from what I'd seen in the Four Souls gameplay, that's like pretty much what you do, right?
I think the thing about Four Souls that I like is, and this sort of will get into the actual like thing we're going to talk about in this podcast eventually, the main topic, because it plays into random elements. But I think my thing with random elements is that like I don't like we're talking about like the Mario Party thing, right? Like I don't like the Mario Party thing where it's like you roll a dice and then that's just it. That's where your engagement ends. Because it's if you roll the dice and that's where your engagement ends, then it's just like, okay, this is what happens, right? But if it's something where it's like you roll the dice and there's things that can happen, like rolling the dice is just part of a larger system where you're basically, as you make your turn, you're focusing on basically strategizing around the probability of the dice, right? So it's not just I'm gonna attack this monster, I'm gonna play a move or whatever, and I'm gonna roll the dice. It's I have this card and this card and this card, and I have this attribute and this thing, and all of those things play into why I'm choosing to roll the dice right now, because it's a like basically, you know, it's a much substantially less chance that I'm not going to get the kind of roll that'll help me out, as opposed to like not. And does that mean that there are times in the game where you're literally taking a 50-50 shot and that sucks? Sure. But I think that's just a product of there being dice in the first place. But if you're gonna have dice in your game, I think Four Souls and there are other games, you know, video games, board games, whatever, like it, where, you know, if you're gonna have this random element with the dice in it, then at least you have the ability to basically manipulate what the consequence of that roll could or would be.
Yeah.
Minimize the luck factor.
Yeah.
Or you can at least play around it. You know, we can get into this randomization stuff later, because I'm sure that will come up in the discussion of roguelikes. Because there's a very important distinction between a couple different kinds of randomness. And what you're describing is what I would call Well, so this sort of thing, I guess since I mentioned it, I might as well go into it now and I can reference it later. But there's two kinds of randomness. There's input and output randomness.
Mm-hmm.
So the sort of random thing where in Mario Party where you take the dice and you roll them, and then whatever you get, that's your result. That would be output randomness, where essentially you're making the choice of what you're going to do beforehand, and you don't know what the outcome of that will be. Whereas input randomness is something random happens, and then you have to make a choice based on what happened. So, like, an example of input randomness would be, like, let's say you're drawing cards in a card game, and you draw your opening hand. That hand is random, but it's input randomness, so you have to decide, okay, what am I going to do with my random hand now? All of those cards could have deterministic effects, and you have to decide what is the best way to distribute these and play them all. That's a very important distinction, and so generally, I prefer input randomness.
Right.
It gives you a lot more control over what happens, whereas output randomness is just sort of you roll the dice, and if you're lucky, something good happens, and if you're not lucky, something bad happens. And obviously you can sort of blur those lines a little bit, but it's a pretty interesting field, the whole topic of randomness in games, because it's very complex. And there's a lot of theories about
since we're getting into it, I'll ask: is there any other games that we want to talk about, or do we want to actually get into the main topic of today?
Well, I did mention that there was that real-time strategy game I was playing,
Which is
Age of Empires 2.
Yes.
I finally decided to take the Age of Empires 2 plunge, which we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. But I've been enjoying my time with Age of Empires 2. I started playing it again because I had a cousin visiting, and he's like super into like the Paradox strategy games, the big ones like Crusader Kings and Stellaris. But he also plays Age of Empires, and so we were talking about that game. So I decided to take the plunge again, and it's very complex. I'm not great at maximizing my economy, but it's very fun, and I've been enjoying it. So it's also cheap. On sale, you can get it for like $3.
Oh, damn.
So
I did not expect
quite a
it to be
deal.
that low. Yeah. Wow.
You should like, it's such a historic game.
It is.
In the real-time strategy genre that not playing it, for $3, it's such a great deal.
Absolutely.
So
right. I don't know. I'm more of a take your time strategy person.
Well, I am too, and I'm still enjoying this game. So, I don't know what that
I've never
means.
really tried much of those games. I've played what is the game called? Total Annihilation?
Oh yeah, Planetary Annihilation. I'm pretty sure that's the one.
Titans.
Yes,
I played the Titans
Titans
one.
is fun.
I thought that was I thought that was fun. I didn't play much of it, but I was kind of surprised.
It's a very good, I'd say it's a good introductory real-time strategy game, but I haven't played that many real-time strategy games, so I'm not sure. But it allows for a very swingy victory condition where, sure, your opponent might be out-economying you, which also, it's a lot easier to get into because the economy is very simple in that game. You just build your little resource collector on the resource node, and it brings in metal, and you can spend that on whatever you want to spend it on. Yeah. Whereas in Age of Empires, there's like 4 different resources you need to worry about, and all your different upgrades do different things. You need to build units that collect those resources instead of like building a resource collector. So you have to make sure that they're all doing it, and you might have to shift around your economy. Is like, oh man, I need more wood. Maybe I should take some guys off of stone to do that, and it gets very complicated very quickly.
Right.
But
where Planetary is just build nukes.
Yep. So it's a lot simpler, but it's also a lot of fun because there's so many crazy abilities. I've always liked the little Stargate things, where you can sneakily build a Stargate somewhere, and then if you build it in the right spot, you just teleport your entire army through, and then you can totally surprise your opponent, or you like teleport them through to a safe planet and then you blow up that planet. So it's a lot of fun.
All right. Yeah, you can have the moon crash course into a planet. That takes a long time to set up,
it does. But it's a very fun game. I haven't played too much of that one either, though. But for the little bit I did play was very fun. So anyway,
same.
yeah, I've just been playing Age of Empires 2. You know, I just wanted to close that, you know, podcast narrative loop because I mentioned it earlier, so I have to pay off that setup.
Yeah, otherwise it's ludonarrative dissonance.
Ooh,
Something like that.
ludonarrative dissonance.
You have to mention it in the essay podcast, or else it's not an essay podcast. It's like the most.
Yep.
Yeah, fun.
We have to spin our own narrative, and if it's not Ludo, then are we really Latin?
Anyone playing anything else?
I do want to put this out there randomly. If our audience wants to see any streams of us playing Tabletop Simulator, just let us know.
Make it happen, probably.
Definitely.
That'd be fun.
Well, that's something Last Life can consider, and plus Chariot.
Yeah.
Chariot
Because
Life.
I'm not
We don't have
I'm
to
not
have
Last Life. You know, despite how similar I might be to a lot of these channels and how a lot of us know each other.
He's got 2 lives, so
Yeah.
That's true. He needs to lose one more.
he has to drop.
I'm not playing
he has
a
to drop
roguelike.
the music professor life, and then I'll have 1 life.
3 lives if you count
Play your
Alexander.
trombone, and we'll invite you once you play your trombone.
There you go.
I could do it in like 2 seconds. It's sitting right next to my desk.
Do it, you coward.
Well, I've been challenged.
Oh man. Okay, it's actually happening.
Just don't do it directly in your mic.
I'll try not. I mean, it's a trombone. If I was gonna do it right into my mic, I would like punch through my screen with the slide.
All right.
This is happening.
Hear that
This is real.
clanky case.
Oh, I like it.
It's been a couple months since I played though. You know, this summer I've been very busy with other things, but
Dude, the creator life is a busy
it
life.
is very busy. I've not had time to practice trombone. I also don't have the music. Like, I'm sure I could find something online. Okay.
Oh yeah, do play like what's a good one? The Mario theme song.
Oh, I haven't memorized that one. It's been so long since I played the trombone, but let's see.
Live and learn.
Oof. This is like out of tune really bad, but well, it also
The more
temperature
out of
affects
tune,
the
the better.
trombone a lot.
It does.
It's not something you have to deal with guitar, but you
Yeah,
know, it's very cold
all the
at the
big
moment.
horn instruments and brass instruments.
Yeah, so you have to like warm up. Oh, and it has not had slide oil in a while, so
You just give us a good
hear
like
that.
2 for 2, and we'll call it a day.
2 for 2. I'm not a music guy in general. Like, I just listen to video game soundtracks. So like oh, for some weird reason I memorized like the Owlboy theme so I can play that.
Okay.
Oh wow.
This
I
is
can
gonna make
hear
me
the
sound really
slide.
bad. It's so bad. I don't
Toot
want to
me,
take
man.
the time
Toot,
to put
toot.
like pressure. Oh. I messed up that last bit, but that should convince you that I can at least make a sound that sounds awful because I haven't
Is
practiced
Audacity
in
doing
months.
okay?
It's not warmed up. The slide is terribly under-greased, and I'll probably put grease on that tonight.
I don't know, all I hear are
Check him out on
excuses, dude.
SoundCloud. Check him out on YouTube. Check him out on Audio Mac. Check him out on Apple Music Connect, if that's still a thing. Don't know where it's still a thing. Like the
I'll be like
Connect
Nakey
tab.
Jakey
Apple
and like
Music.
drop music on my video essay channel.
Yes.
Have they ever improved iTunes so that it's reasonably usable?
Well, that's actually a thing. So like the Mac OS is getting updated later this year, and they're getting rid of the software called iTunes, and they're replacing it with 3 different applications called Music, TV, and Podcasts, respectively. And the idea is that way,
Okay.
it's less confusing. The Windows iTunes app will be the same though, and the iTunes Store to buy music will still exist alongside the streaming service. So I don't know what that means. The program will get better, but who knows?
I mean, it's just like when I was a kid, I had an iPod, an iTouch, even an iPhone because I was a loser. And you buy music on iTunes, you're basically sinking money into like versus Bandcamp,
Right.
where you actually own the music you buy. And I'm sure you're supporting the artist more. I don't know.
I mean, you can still get the MP3s, so it doesn't really matter where you buy it. But there have been reports that come out of in iTunes libraries, like if people like burn a CD to their computer and the CD metadata matches with iTunes, then sometimes iTunes will just replace the audio files with like the iTunes versions. Where if you have like a demo version of a CD, for example, then that's not the CD you burned, but iTunes just freaks out for some reason because it assumes that you bought it on iTunes. So they're
it's just so strictly tied to iTunes.
yeah. I mean, it comes down to
it
comes down to all software. It comes down to the whole thing where like when you buy a game on Steam, for example, or like any digital storefront, you're not buying the game. You're buying a license to use the game, or any piece of software. Final Cut.
Right, but like.
So
I think the key difference is iTunes feels so much more strict because it's so much difficult to actually get everything that you want onto your Apple device.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they want you to. This is the Apple thing: is they want you to use their hardware and software in the exact way that they intend you to, and if you deviate that from that even slightly, then everything just breaks.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something that everyone encountered.
Yeah. But yeah. So are we playing? Did anyone play anything else?
I mean, I've been playing other things, but you know, I think, you know, for time's sake, we might want to skip over those. But
That's
you know,
fine.
I guess I
I'm
could
good
like
with that.
list them
I
off.
just didn't know there's something that anyone was really excited about. I played the Crash Team Racing remake, but I don't really have much to say about it.
Yeah.
So.
I haven't played that.
It's good.
I mean, Darkwood was the one I really wanted to talk
Yeah.
about because that game it's amazing.
You've sold me on it. I'm probably gonna get it sometime this weekend. So, thank you.
I guess
Oh yeah, for sure.
I started emulating Mother 3. That's what I was playing before you guys contacted me to do this recording.
Yeah, no, I tried that a few years ago. I just have my RPG problem, so I just couldn't get into it.
I also have those problems.
Yeah, I couldn't.
And
I couldn't get into the first one.
ooh, well, the first one I've heard is
Are
very.
you talking about Mother 1 or Earthbound?
Oh, I guess Earthbound.
Yeah.
Yeah, Earthbound, I hate the battle mechanics, but I also hate every RPG's battle mechanics except for Undertale and Pyre, but those don't really count because they're very different. Like
Pyre doesn't
every
count.
RPG that throws out the established like RPG combat, I immediately like a lot more.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you know, I definitely do not like the mechanics of most RPGs,
Yeah.
but, you know, I like the tone of the Mother series.
I can agree with
and
that.
it's mostly just curiosity. I don't know how you actually. I think Mother 3 is a lot better than Earthbound.
Most
I feel
people
like
say that.
Earthbound's story is not all that great. I mean, it has some interesting moments.
I think the
but-
reason why people like Earthbound is because more of its setting and its character rather
Yeah,
than like its actual story, where Mother 3 tries to tell a real story.
if you play like the opening segments of each of these games, you can tell that the focus of these games are very different.
Absolutely.
Whereas, like, Mother 3 opens up where, it's introducing you to a lot of characters, and they all have names, and they're staying around, and, your main character, well, I guess, you start off playing a little bit as Lucas and his brother, but then, like, you're playing as Flint for a while, their father, and, like, he has a very clear narrative reason of like what he's doing, because essentially he's like running around in a forest because it's on fire, trying to help people, and then he gets caught up in his family is like in the forest at that time, and I don't want to go into all the lore, but then if you compare it to Ness, essentially I half love this. But like a fly from the future shows up and gives him a prophecy that, hey, you're going to defeat this Gygus dude. And then the fly defeats a Starman. And it's like, oh, wow, this dude is crazy. And he's like dropping all this cool lore. But then he gets killed because like Porky's mother like swats it. And then with his dying breath, he tells you that you need to like, go to all these 8 locations, and then it's like, okay, I'm on my fetch quest now, and I'm off on my wacky adventure.
Yep.
And then like Ness doesn't even hardly talk.
No.
Throughout Earthbound, like he's just silent and boring. And like you get like the various party members, and then once they're in your party, they just don't do anything.
Yeah.
They just sit there and exist, and they never say anything interesting. Whereas, Mother 3 has interesting characters that bring up stuff and interact with other characters, and it just seems from a writing perspective to be a clearly superior product.
And I want to throw in another game into that conversation real quick, just because I'm assuming this video will be public when this podcast goes out, but King K made a video about Chrono Trigger, and I've been looking into Chrono Trigger recently. It's not a game that I think I could play for the same RPG reasons that we've been talking about, but it has just through the nature of it being a game where it has all these different endings and all these different characters doing things, and how it has to build a world for you to care about it, just through the nature of how the story works with time traveling back and forth between different locations and time periods. The characters in your party actually do matter, and they do constantly say things, and there's sort of different ways that dialogue plays out based on who's in your party. And it doesn't mean the events of the story change based on who's in your party, but it's like, someone in your party will say something that's accurate to their character based on the situation. Yeah. Which is pretty neat.
Yeah. I think an RPG, if I'm going to put up with their terrible battle mechanics, you need to have a good story.
Yeah.
And,
right.
Like I've played Earthbound, all the way through, and it doesn't have a good story. I'm sure Chrono Trigger has a very interesting story. I just haven't played it. I haven't played any of the Final Fantasy games.
No, me neither.
Like the only other RPG I've really played is a little bit of Pokemon. Yeah. But that was on a car trip with borrowing my cousin's copy. This is a different cousin than the one I mentioned earlier. And we would play it in the car, but that's like the only experience I have with the Pokemon series. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of it doesn't succeed on the narrative level. Yeah, it's just running around collecting rats to defeat other rats with, and that's Pokemon. And I'm sure there's more to it, and all the fans will be like, oh, it's very different from that, but.
Especially the later generations, I know they try and do more ambitious stories, but ultimately, like, the premise of the games is the same in each one.
You're cutting out.
No, I just said that the premise of each game is the same, even though in later games, they try and do more ambitious stories.
Yeah. But yeah, RPGs, not my thing. I might play through Mother 3, I might not. Currently, I'm liking the story, but we'll see if it slows down at all
Yeah.
and gets to be a slog.
Right.
I'm still not
And
a fan of the battle mechanics, but
Right.
that's what I'd say about any RPG.
Yeah.
Except for like those weird tactical RPGs, stuff like Fire Emblem,
yeah.
or the other game I was sort of playing, which crazy segue, the Banner Saga. This was a game I hadn't really seen a lot about it, but I saw it was it's essentially a game with a Scandinavian art style, like a Viking sort of thing, and it's a turn-based strategy game that's also has like RPG elements. And so it was $5 the other day on Steam, and I'm like, well, this seems like something I'd be pretty interested in. It's got the turn-based strategy stuff. So I took a gamble on it, and so far I think it's pretty interesting. It does some very interesting stuff in terms of battle mechanics. Essentially, there's like 2 separate health bars. You have your armor and your strength, and you can deal armor damage, which will let you do more strength damage later on, because so your strength value is also your health.
Right.
So like, let's say a character has 10 strength, and he punches a character with 9 armor. He will deal 1 damage because
Right.
10 minus 9 is 1. So the lower their armor is, the more damage your strength will do. But then as your strength goes down, so like let's say an opponent punches you and now you only have 7 strength. Well, now you only have 7 attack.
Oh, so your health is your attack.
Yes, your health is your
That's
attack,
so
which
cool.
it's very similar to Advance Wars or War Groove, which both of those are games that I really like. But it's a very different dynamic, because instead of like you moving all of your units and then your opponent moving all of their units, it's a thing where you move one of your units, then they move one of their units, then you move one of your units, and then they move one of their units. So it alternates back and forth. So it's a lot harder to keep track of like, okay, you moving here will put me in danger from this dude, and it's a very different sort of game, and also it's a bit different from those previously mentioned, War Groove and Advance Wars. It's a bit different from those because those games have like expendable units, I guess you could call them, where like you build an infantry unit and it can fight some stuff, but if it dies, it's not a huge deal, because you can always make another one. But in this, all the units you have at the start,
That's it.
they're all the units you get, and so you have to make them count. And
That's super interesting.
yeah, it's pretty neat. I haven't gotten super far in like the whole game. I've only gotten a few hours, but
Interesting.
from what I've played, it'll be pretty neat. And it has the whole RPG story, which the story I'm not the biggest fan of so far. It sort of throws you in to this big complicated thing, and it introduces you to a ton of characters, and it's like, okay, well you got to catch up on all of this immediately because it's all relevant, and then like by the time you figured out who everyone is, it switches over to a completely different party with a completely new set of characters you can get into. And it doesn't really it doesn't even really tell you what your character is doing super clearly. Like your first party, he's essentially a tax collector who goes around to various towns collecting taxes. But then like he shows up and breaks up a fight between like the governor and some other people who are like trying to overthrow the governor. But then like that whole plot line is sort of dropped, even though they say like, oh well, you should maybe do some investigating, and like then like you're like, oh well, you can maybe help us, and then you're like escorting another dude, and it was a bit muddled and confusing. There's definitely a chance that it will get better, and as you get further into the game, it gets a bit more clear.
Things could come back into play that you don't know about.
Yes, but maybe by the time I get back to those things, I will have forgotten all of the nuances of that story, because I've been focusing on the other story and learning all of the crazy stuff it's throwing my way. So it's a bit too early for me to clearly talk about the story. It's just not the best introduction.
The gameplay,
but gameplay wise, very neat. And there's some other stuff I haven't mentioned, but you know, I can't talk about it
Right.
without spending too much time.
I'm gonna make another crazy segue and say like the mechanic of like, oh, the characters you get at the beginning, that being all you have, is really cool because permadeath is also a feature of roguelikes. So I'm gonna get to the reason why you're here, which is that a few weeks ago you asked a question in the official lastlife.net podcast thread on the forum, which we were talking before this started that you do like, you know, full on like questions that are actually like 5 questions. So we'll see how much of this we get to. But what are your thoughts about roguelikes? Do you feel that the term roguelite is valid, or is it a term thrown around by a bunch of people that are upset that roguelikes have evolved past ASCII characters and dungeon crawling? What are your favorite roguelikes? What unique advantages and disadvantages do you feel the genre has?
If you throw all the questions out at once, people are going to forget them.
I know, but we'll get to them as we go, but I'm throwing the whole thing out, and then we'll like get back. You wanted to, you know? So
yeah.
So where do you want? You asked the question, Alec. So you set the stage. Where are we starting with this?
Well, I guess it would probably be best to start by like getting your guys' thoughts, so I know like where to like take the direction, because you know I'm sort of like, you know, for those of you who don't know me, I've sort of branded myself as the roguelike guy, you know, in the same way that Lamhoot has been branded as the SpongeBob guy. I'm trying to be the roguelike guy, whereas Lamhoot is very unfortunate. But you know, I made a big video talking about a ton of different roguelikes. You know, I'm very passionate about the genre. I will defend it tooth and nail. You know, maybe not specific games, but I will defend the concept of a roguelike until the day I die, probably. And I really like these games, and I think they offer an experience that not a lot of other games can really offer. And, you know, for a variety of reasons. You know, I think these games are very good at providing tension and, you know, true gameplay stakes. I think they do that better than almost any other game, or any other kind of game as a whole, where, you know, mistakes matter a lot in roguelikes.
Yeah.
More so, you know, even something like that's known for being, you know, well, the gameplay is super important and your mistakes matter. Like you know, maybe Dark Souls, you know, something like that. I guess I haven't played Dark Souls, so maybe I shouldn't use it as an example. But you know, other like single player games, like what would be a good example? I'm trying to think of something. But let's just use Dark Souls.
For a roguelike.
But like,
that's just
you know,
a high
in Dark
stakes
Souls,
game that isn't a roguelike.
Which one is not a roguelike?
Dark Souls isn't a roguelike.
Yeah, it's not a roguelike.
Yeah.
But like, you know, if you make a mistake in that game, the worst that'll ever happen is it'll kick you back to a bonfire.
Right.
And then you go back and you fight the boss again.
Right.
And, you know, sure, that might be annoying and you might have to do that fight many, many times, but ultimately you're not going to lose all of the progress that you've gotten before that point.
The main thing you lose in Dark Souls, why I think like it's actually like an example that sort of solves the problem that you deal with like your Marios or something like that, is that you lose all of your currency when you die and you have to go back to where you died in order to recover it. Where like a lot of games, like I'll use Super Meat Boy as an example too, where it's like the whole deal there is there's no stakes to death. You can die as many times as you want. The only thing you really gain from death, because you just learn. You just lose the small amount of progress, but you learn from the death and keep going. Where in a game like Dark Souls, you lose your currency, or in a game like The End Is Nigh's later chapter, you lose something that I won't spoil because I really love that game. But I think with roguelikes, because of the fact that it's most commonly you die and then you literally lose the entire run, and then the next run is going to be very different in many ways. that's what makes it so interesting. It's that you have to constantly adapt.
Yes. And, I think it spawns a different play style. Whereas, something like Dark Souls or Mario, it's more about memorization. You're memorizing what is the best place to jump. Even something like The End Is Nigh. Like, you're memorizing the best way to get through and, committing that to muscle memory.
Yeah.
And like, okay, just practice, and this one segment will eventually become easy.
Yeah.
Whereas roguelikes, I think, encourage more systemic knowledge, where you're like, okay, what does everything do? How should I approach this situation? Because if I'm wrong, I might lose and die.
Yeah.
And, so I'm like, okay, how does the system work? How does this weapon deal damage? It encourages you to know every little detail, because if you don't know every little detail, you'll probably die. But then when you finally win, it's because you have spent the time mastering every aspect of this game, and
the systems rather
knowledge.
than the levels or the
Yes.
design.
Right. And not to be confused with trial and error, information is still very important.
Yeah. You're learning about the system and how it works, and what are the rules and expectations, and how does Spelunky, what is a good plan in Spelunky, and you're figuring that out through your deaths.
Absolutely.
But you can't also just rely on knowing, oh, well, there's this block here and I can get this weapon over here, and so then I can just run through. You can't look up a guide for a roguelike. Maybe that's what this all comes down to is, for something like Dark Souls, you can look up a guide and it will say, oh, well, go to this place and it can get you an easy item there, and then you can use that to blow through this area, which will give you this item, and it'll make the game a lot easier, and you can plan out those routes.
Yeah.
But roguelikes, it has to be your knowledge. You cannot rely on anyone else.
It has to deal with your understanding of the systems in the game, and also not just the systems in the game, but also your ability to use them well.
Yes.
I mean,
I think it's mostly the ability.
Yeah, in many ways, yeah. I mean, my quintessential roguelike that I go to would be The Binding of Isaac, which I know Alex hasn't played. But the thing about The Binding of Isaac is there are a lot of different synergies between items. You'll get I'm trying to think of the names of these things. It's been a minute, but there's an item where you can charge up and shoot a laser as opposed to just the normal projectile that you normally have, the tears.
Right.
And so you have that, but then there's also another item you can get that basically takes whatever your normal projectile is, so normally the tears, and turns them into an orbiting thing around you. So then, if you have the laser guy and you have this orbiting situation, that you basically just have a giant moving laser circle that you can just move around the entire screen, which is super powerful. But it also requires you to basically control two different entities at the same time, as opposed to the traditional top-down shooting situation where you're shooting a projectile, because the one that gives you that ring, or I think it's actually just a big tier. I don't think it's actually a ring now that I think about it. But it basically, the way it works is, instead of it being something that you shoot, it just is always on the screen and you move it around. So you're basically controlling two different entities at once. If you're not good at that, then that synergy isn't helpful for you. So it's going into knowing okay, well, this is something that can happen. Am I prepared for that? Can I do that? Will that help me or will that hurt me?
Well, and I think that brings up another aspect of roguelikes, which I think is very important, which is their focus on emergent mechanics. What you mentioned with the teardrop and the thing that encircles you. Again, I haven't played it, so I'm not as familiar with these items, but those two items come together to produce an interesting consequence that was not necessarily programmed in by the designer. Maybe it was in that specific case.
In that case, it was. But I think the thing is,
Okay.
like the thing with the synergies in Isaac is, I feel like it was something where in the original game, the Flash game, those things were like coding accidents that just sort of happen because of what you were saying. Like they're not programmed in, but it just creates an interesting result. So I think when they designed the Binding of Isaac Rebirth, I think they more intentionally focused on things and tried to make that a key part of the game. And then through that, even more things that weren't planned kind of came out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You know,
emergent design.
I could point to Spelunky for all sorts of examples. It's probably the roguelike I'm the most familiar with. But, like, you know, there's an example of, in the ice caves, there are, like, these little UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kill them. But whenever they're, you know, so when you kill a UFO, a little alien, like, pops out and he has, like, a little parachute.
Yeah.
And then his UFO crashes to the ground. And when it hits the ground, it explodes. So
Right.
you can see how this can lead to some unexpected situations where if you're using the boomerang item, it sort of has this weird property where it sometimes, like, it has like a multi-hit attack where it can bring enemies back to you. Sometimes. So what can happen is if you kill a UFO with a boomerang, it will bring the UFO corpse to you.
Yeah.
And then you'll blow yourself up and die. But that's like it was an unprogrammed thing that Derek, you thought was very fun, and it's still in the game, and you can, you know, it's something where, I'm just going to use my boomerang because it's a very good ranged weapon, and then you end up killing yourself, and now you know, do not kill UFOs with boomerangs. And there's all sorts of, like, little weird mechanics because, you know, the designer doesn't have control over how everything comes together, right? Like, the levels are all, you know, they don't, like, they have control over the levels, but they don't have total control.
Yeah.
So you can get really interesting stuff like that. And that's sort of, it's a cornerstone of the genre. It's not necessarily required for a roguelike. You can build a roguelike without emergent mechanics, or at least without strong emergent mechanics, because I believe that, you know, emergent mechanics will exist in some extent in any game. But roguelikes, you know, at least the older ones, they were sort of known for having a wide array of emergent, you know, things that can happen. So that's sort of something that has been transferred over into the newer style of roguelike design, where a lot of them still have this focus on emergent, unexpected outcomes that are interesting and left in the game because they're fun.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing that, you know, keeps the genre very interesting, because a lot of, you know, games don't have as interesting of emergent mechanics.
Definitely.
You know, if you go through, like, you know, The End Is Nigh, everything is going to work as Edmund McMillan and his partner, I can't remember his name. Yeah. It's all going to work as they intended.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's great. You know, that game would not work if it randomly did things that you weren't expecting to happen.
Right.
But there's also something to be said for, like, this one time I was going through a dungeon and, like, you know, I found, like, a, you know, crazy Medusa monster, but I, you know, wore a pot over my head and, like, you know, fought it off, but I couldn't see anything, so I fell down into a pit and died. You know, that's just
story.
Not some. Yeah, that's a story. And, you know, roguelikes are very, especially, like, you know, this is one aspect of old school roguelikes that I think is very, you know, it's one of their redeeming qualities. I guess I'll put it that way.
Right.
Is they're very good at generating these stories.
Yeah.
You actually, it isn't really a roguelike, but Dwarf Fortress, it has some of the elements of a roguelike. I wouldn't call it a full roguelike, though. But it has this whole narrative thing of, you know, you're building up a fortress, and everything you do, you know, it will have unintended consequences, and your entire fortress might be brought down because someone left a Necronomicon in, like, the library or something, and, you know, reanimated, you know, every single bit of flesh in your fortress, and then all of a sudden all the hair that you had sheared off of your, you know, animals was strangling your dwarves in their sleep and your fortress falls. Weird
Right.
stuff like that. Like,
Those are things you don't expect that make it for an interesting story.
yeah, it's a fun story. And,
Absolutely.
roguelikes, I think, are very good at telling those sorts of stories. Another one, which I personally haven't played this one, but Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead.
Haven't heard of it.
That's
I'll
an
look it up.
interesting sounding one. Essentially, it's a post-apocalypse where, it's a post-apocalypse. I can't remember the exact nature of it, but I think it's a zombie post-apocalypse, and you're just a character, and you can change your starting location. Like you could be like in a vault or something, or you could be like in the military, or you could be like a prisoner, and you're like escaping from prison in the middle of like the end of the world. And then you're going around and you just have like this little story of this dude surviving, in the post-apocalypse.
This is super interesting. 'Cause it looks like I'm like looking. This is the Wikipedia description, and the first sentence is like, unlike most roguelikes, it has no goal. The player is free to explore the procedurally generated map, clear areas of monsters, worth your NPCs, build shelters and vehicles. It's just based on just day to day, just whatever, and just like that organic story that just develops through that, and like what you choose to do or what your own player set goals are, which is super interesting.
Yeah. So, I haven't played it, so I don't know how good it is.
Right.
But it has that, ethos and that goal of just allowing for player-driven stories.
Yeah.
And it's not a story told on high from the designer where they say, oh, well, this is what our characters are, and, you don't really have any input over them.
Mm-hmm.
But in a roguelike, you have total input.
Yeah.
And if you want something to happen, you can probably make it happen.
Yeah.
There's another one, which I haven't played this one either. Streets of Rogue.
I've heard of that.
This one it's less like the older ones. It's more of like a top-down shooter, but it still it's very close to the traditional roguelike style.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, it is very emergent, and if you just like watch the trailer, it goes through all the crazy things you can do to, rob or whatever you're doing. I can't remember what the example is in the trailer, but you can like create a zombie horde, or you can like bribe other people to do your dirty work, or you can like pump yourself up on like substances, so you're just like a behemoth and you can just whatever you need to do.
Or play complete pacifist and hack computers.
Yeah, it has the freedom to let you decide how you want your story to unfold.
Yeah.
And so that's not necessarily present in every roguelike.
But I like the ones that do that kind of thing, even if it's like not necessarily like you tell your whole story like fully open-ended. But I appreciate when you're like going through a run, right, in like in a game like Isaac, or I'll throw it out another name, Rogue Legacy, which is the game that coined the term roguelite, for better or for worse.
Yes. We'll have to talk about roguelites later.
But Rogue Legacy I really like because you go in, right, and you have the first area, which is like the main like center castle area, and that's like the easiest area, like get the habit of whatever, and there's a boss in there, right, and your goal is you got to beat these 4 bosses and then you fight the final boss, and when you beat a boss then it's permanent and you're good. So it's mostly like once you beat that first boss, which is like pretty easy, then it's like, okay, now you have 3 different directions you can go, and yes, there's like a recommended, like, okay, this way is slightly easier than like this way. I know that like going down is supposed to be is like the hardest one, and I think I want to say going up is what you should do second, and then out is what you should do third, but I don't remember. But they have, there's 3 areas you can go to, so it's like based on what character you get at the start and how that character, what traits that character has from prior runs and the things that you get along the way. Like, you can make a decision at that point to say, okay, well, I'm going to go in this direction because of the character I have, because of this build, because of how it's set up. I'm going to make this decision, which is sort of going into the idea of this like input randomness. It's like, okay, well, you got this thing through this roguelike situation, and you're going to make a deterministic decision based on what you got, what you were dealt.
Yes.
And I really like that, as opposed to just like, oh, good luck, go down again.
Yeah.
Right.
Going down the same path.
I have my own thoughts about Rogue Legacy. I haven't beaten the first boss, so I don't feel confident fully putting it down. But at the same time, I felt like a lot of my runs in that game were very homogenous. Like, they felt the same, which this is maybe where we're getting into fine hairs of what makes for a good or a bad roguelike.
Sure.
But I feel like, if you want to sort of pull from my video that I released on roguelikes, where I talk about roguelike progression, I feel like Rogue Legacy did this thing where it made the actual in-run progression less interesting, so it could add on some progression that existed outside of the runs, because most of the items you get are gold.
Yes.
And that's like the main item you get. But gold isn't useful to you
in the middle
when you're
of the
actually in the dungeon. It's only useful to you after you die and you get to go and buy stuff. Whereas in a game like Spelunky, gold, it's always factoring into your decisions, and everything you encounter is guiding how you are supposed to go through the dungeon. And oh, well, I found the shotgun, but maybe I want to leave it behind so I can get the damsel, or maybe I want to get the teleporter instead because it can like let me skip some of the harder parts of the level. Or you have to think about all those sorts of things. And when you focus on this sort of adding on external progression, I think you can run the risk of undermining the actual in-run progression itself, which I feel like Rogue Legacy didn't do a very good job at balancing that. It was sort of the first game that tried something like that, and I don't find it all that interesting. I don't think it has very good game feel. The jumps have always felt a bit weird, and the combat I've never felt is great. Like, it doesn't have the thing in other roguelikes where you can have like different weapons, and you have to figure out, okay, well, this weapon works really well. Like, I guess it has the magic, but again, that's something you decide before the run. And that's not going to change throughout the run. Whereas, in something like Crypt of the Necrodancer, you're going to have to decide what weapon you're going to want to use while you're in the run and going through.
That was an example I was going to bring up with the gold situation, because it and Isaac and Spelunky like all have this main like shop system where like you like have to find the shop, and then when you find the shop, you have all these different options as to what you can do with the shop, and how that'll affect your run. I think Spelunky system's by far the most interesting of the bunch, because you can straight up like assault the shopkeeper.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but you can actually do that in Crypt of the Necrodancer as well.
Really?
Yeah, you can fight the guys and take their stuff.
I didn't know that.
They're not normally hostile, though, but you have to, like... normally how you start it is you, like, lay down a bomb next to their feet and run away. And if you do that, they will turn into an enemy. And then if you defeat them... You also get a special item for defeating them, like a Crown of Greed.
Nice.
Which, does some cool stuff. So
I love that they, thought of that,
Yeah.
as a thing.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Crazy.
That's another interesting thing about roguelikes that we can also get into is how they approach secrets.
Yeah.
Because there are some crazy cool roguelike secrets.
Absolutely.
Because by their nature, they're elusive. At least most of them are.
Yeah, because the idea is if they're not that elusive, you're playing this through these runs so many times that if they're super obvious, then there's nothing new to discover. Going into Isaac, like they have one of the neatest things that I discovered when I was playing through the first Isaac, like all those times ago, is that, you know, on every floor there's always a secret room, right? And the key is that because you have this map in the top right corner, and the way the secret room works is it's always in between two other rooms, so like on either side. So there can be other rooms like around it, but the secret room is always sandwiched by two rooms in some way. So you can take a good guess as to where the secret room could be based on how the map is oriented. So you probably have like a solid, like usually 2 or 3 guesses to where it could be. So if you have X number of bombs, you take your best guess, or you choose to keep your bombs, or you choose to use all your bombs to get the secret room because maybe there's something really cool in it. But the real neat thing is that I discovered that a lot of floors also have a second secret room that just straight up like is only touching one other room. And the game doesn't tell you those things, so it's just like if you're like bombing an enemy and like there's this whole other thing that comes out, then that opens up this whole other realm of possibility that you never even considered with all these other runs of the game before.
Yeah. You were cutting out there, so
sorry.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah.
But but it's like
roguelike.
Sorry.
We still caught everything you said.
What was that?
No, he was just saying that he heard most of what I said. But no, you can go.
Yeah. But yeah, I think my favorite roguelike secret is, again, going back to Spelunky. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the eggplant?
Yeah. Just to go for it. It sounds
so,
familiar, but I don't know.
So for our viewers who don't know what the eggplant is, in Spelunky there are these altars, and you can sacrifice bodies to the altar to get fun rewards. But you can also sacrifice other items. So you can like sacrifice the golden idols to get like a golden monkey that like poops out gems and stuff. But the one that we really want to talk about is when you sacrifice a present, which presents are like items that give you a random item. It could be really good or really bad. But if you sacrifice a present to Kali, she will give you an eggplant. And if you can carry this eggplant into the final area of the game, into the final boss fight, and you throw this eggplant at the final boss, he just dies in one hit. Now the problem with that is the eggplant is fragile. So it's like one of the vases you can carry around. So if you drop it and it falls, it'll just break. And if you throw it, it'll break. So the first guy to do this was a guy named Bananasaurus Rex. And he figured out how to do this in single player. Because what he had to do is, in order to get to the underworld, you have to do this whole crazy chain of actions. And essentially, at one part, it requires you to kill yourself. That's in like the ice caves. And then you're revived with the item you get in the jungle. Mm-hmm. You're revived inside of a Moai head. Mm-hmm. And then that gives you the item to proceed to the next secret area. Mm-hmm. But if you're carrying the eggplant, it won't let you if you die, you're just gonna not have the eggplant when you move to the next level, because it doesn't let you continue exploring after you die because you're inside of the Moai head. Mm-hmm. But so people thought that it was impossible to do this in single player. In fact, Derek Yu thought it was impossible, but this guy Bananasaurus Rex figured out that if you anger Kali enough times, you'll get like a ball and chain. Mm-hmm. And this ball and chain has a property where it will destroy a block. Like if you're hanging below the ball and like you're suspended, it will destroy the block above it so you don't get stuck. But then this can destroy any block in the game, including the Moai head blocks, which are normally indestructible.
Right.
So he can use this to pass into the Moai head, without killing himself, while carrying the eggplant. And then in the second area, now this is where things get crazy. In order to pass through the door, you need to have a scepter that you get from killing Anubis. Mm-hmm. And it unlocks the door. But if you unlock the door, then you go through the door. So, well, how can you carry the eggplant and the scepter at the same time? Well, the answer is you have to get a hired hand, which are notorious in Spelunky for being awful. They will kill you accidentally so many times. So most players don't bother with them, but they can carry items. So then you essentially have a choice. You can give the hired hand your eggplant, but that's like giving a toddler a antique vase and then telling them to run through like a death gauntlet. It's just not a good idea. But then you could also give them the scepter, but that's like giving them a loaded shotgun, and they could kill you at any point. So you have a very bad choice, but you go through and then you get the eggplant to the end and beat the game. But it's just it's a fun little secret thing that it's very elusive, and I think because of the nature of roguelikes, in most games with these sort of really obscure secrets, typically if you just input this code in like this corner, some guy will pop up and it's a secret or whatever. It's just some really obscure thing, and if you do it in the right way, you get the secret. But in order to see the Spelunky secret, not only do you need to understand the game's systems, but you have to execute on this really hard set of actions. But then doing it is so much more rewarding because if you put in like the Konami code in some corner, like it's not going to feel as it's easy. Anyone could do that.
Right. You just need to know.
Yeah, you have to know. But in roguelikes, you have to know and you have to execute.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to like wait for the right moment to execute. Maybe that the secret is there, but well, maybe I don't have the right items for this run to be effective. So you just don't. So, I think roguelike secrets are just way cooler than most other games' secrets because, just by their nature, they tend to come out of emergent systems that require execution, and they're elusive because, the random level generation.
Right.
And that's a very interesting set of, characteristics for a secret to have that you can't really get anywhere else, in my opinion.
Definitely. Yeah, that's just a crazy secret. Like, you couldn't do that in any other game in that exact way, to the point, especially where the developer of the game didn't think it could be done in that way in single player. Like, that's nuts.
Right. Like he thought you had to be in multiplayer mode.
Yeah.
Because if you can hold multiple objects,
yeah,
you can get through. But yeah,
that's
it's
the
a
neat
crazy
thing
secret.
about roguelikes is just because there's so many possibilities, but also because people are just so dedicated to that kind of stuff, like Bananasaurus Rex. Like, even like a developer could hide like the craziest thing in a game, in a roguelike especially, and it'll be discovered like instantly.
Yeah.
And the example I'll give for that, I'm going to go back to Isaac again, is this character, the Lost. And the Lost was added in this update, like, I don't remember if it was Afterbirth or what it was, but like, basically, like, the developer Edmund just didn't say anything about it. He didn't even mention that he added another character to the game, but it was just there. And at some point, like a little bit after the update release, he's like, there's something in this thing that I think will take a while to like be found out. 2 days later, I want to say it was like 2 days later, the Lost was discovered. And the way you get the Lost in the Binding of Isaac is, hang on, I'm gonna just look this up and read it, because it's insane. And it's not like people like broke the code of the game or anything like that to figure this out, as far as I understand. But the way it works is that you have to go through multiple runs and die at certain points in the run as very specific characters, and you have to do this 4 times with 4 different characters. And it's like super specific. So it's like, for example, the first one is Isaac, who's like the first like regular character, like your default character, must die to a very specific enemy in the first floor of the game. And then the next one is, Magdalene must die to her own bomb in the second area of the game, the caves. Then it's Judas, because these are all named after character, biblical references, blah blah blah. Judas must die to any mom attack in the depths. The mom is like the first like final boss of the game, but then when you beat her, then you can go to like deeper to the next final boss. So Judas must die to mom, specifically. And then lastly, Azazel must die to any Satan attack, which is like, this is like the third final boss is probably the best way to describe it, but there is some branching paths later on, but we'll just say that that's the third final boss. So you have to die in these very, very specific places, and then this character will be unlocked. And it's like,
how did people discover
people are just
this?
crazy.
I have no idea. Well, actually...
And it's
It has to be-
consecutively, by the way. It's not like just any time. It's like in this specific order. So it's like, pick Isaac, die on first floor. Pick Magdalene, die on the second area to a bomb. Pick it's like in this very specific order.
Not to undermine your point there,
That's kind of dumb, honestly.
I mean, but it's fun. That like it was put in to be obscure and weird.
Yeah.
And roguelike players will do it. But not to undermine your point though, but the Spelunky eggplant run took months to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
Like it took players a lot longer. Like,
because there's a skill element. Because
Right,
there's a skill element that isn't in play in Isaac.
Right, which obviously there still is a skill
to get to a
element.
certain part of the game, but you doing the eggplant run is a very specific skill that the game doesn't normally test.
Right, like you have to.
Well, I feel like figuring out the eggplant would be easier than the whole Isaac the Lost crap.
But you have to do it. You have to carry the eggplant through the entire game. Like that's what's
Right,
crazy
and-
about it. So
and this
in order
game
to
is so
even
hard. And
figure
you
it
had-
out,
like,
you need to
people had to
already be like
find-
crazy good.
Yeah, like people had to like find exploits to get the eggplant to the end.
Yeah.
They had to find unintended emergent mechanics with the ball and chain, and then doing the thing with the hired hand.
Yeah.
People had to discover that they could do that. And actually, there's one thing I didn't mention about the hired hand. What they would do is they would reset their games, because the first time you go into the mothership, which is a secret area in the game, the first time you go there, you can find a coffin, which unlocks one of the special character skins that you can use on later runs. But the first time you find them, they come out as a hired hand. So in the mothership, you can find a little robot dude, and this happens to be right before where you would need him in the temple.
Right.
So people would reset their game so they get a guaranteed hired hand, instead of having to. Normally, what you do is you buy them from a shop.
Right.
Which, if a shop doesn't spawn, and the hired hand shop is much rarer than the other kinds of shops, so the odds of you getting that are so low. But people figured out, oh well, you can just reset the game and get this guy every single time.
Dang, that's crazy. That's like
Crazy.
speedrunning level stuff. With like
Oh,
figuring
yeah.
things out, which is
There's a lot of crossover there, because I think Bananasaurus Rex also speedran the game, and he also has like one of the high score, going for like getting the most money, which that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
What people do in that. I used a little bit of footage of that in my roguelike video, and I was watching this dude play Spelunky in such a specific way,
Right.
because they have to get the ghost. And here's another little secret thing about Spelunky. If the ghost goes over one of the gems, it will turn into a diamond. So what he does is, he has the diamonds, and they're more valuable, so he has to wait for the ghost to come. But then he also has to figure out how to destroy the entire level, because there are gems hidden inside of blocks.
Right.
And so if he wants to get the high score, he has to get all of those.
Right.
So he's like literally going through destroying every single block in the game, or at least every block that he can, Typically, this involves getting a plasma gun
Yeah.
because it can blow up blocks. But other than that, there's no real consistent way to destroy blocks that will last forever.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of secrets and a lot of mastery and understanding. And the thing about roguelike secrets that I think also sets them apart is a roguelike secret is more often than not useful to the player.
Yeah.
Knowing that the ghost will turn gems into diamonds, that's something that the player can use to get an edge.
Exactly.
Whereas like a lot of secrets are just, oh well, here's a fun little Easter egg that we threw in because we wanted to.
Right. When the secret is something that's like actually another piece of intelligence that you have in this massive web of understanding how this system works. Like,
Yes.
that's awesome.
But yeah. And roguelikes do that very well.
They do.
So, obviously some of them do it better than others, but
Yeah.
it's another aspect of the genre that I find extremely compelling.
Absolutely. Well,
So I guess
we are getting into world record in 5 episodes, the longest Last Life episode podcast, but I do want to touch on the roguelite part of your question. So I think we'll finish
Yes.
off there. And I want to go into that from an angle that you might not expect, because I'm pretty sure both of us have watched Dennis's video on Pikmin 2.
yes.
So I want to start there because
Okay.
because Pikmin 2 is a super interesting game with its cave system where basically you go in and the caves are procedurally generated and you have a limited supply of Pikmin, and if you run out then you're out and you're done and you die and you get out, but then you can eventually rebuild your supply and keep trying again, but the dungeon's different every single time. It doesn't have the sort of synergistic or huge progression benefits that a lot of the roguelikes we've been talking about have, but it does have the benefit of this like flat planar like surface world area to basically give you this opportunity to plan for this dungeon that you don't fully know what to expect every time. So
Right.
So I guess when you talk about a term of something like a roguelite, right? I guess you see roguelike elements bleeding into other games as early as 2000 whatever Pikmin 2 is. And even earlier games, most certainly. I mean, XCOM, for example, like has permadeath and the maps are procedurally generated. But I guess at what point do we think it's part of something like a genre, like in this roguelike genre, and isn't just something that has elements of roguelikes? Like, where's the line? When does that become the defining characteristic of the game?
Well, so I guess in my video, I go into some detail about this, but not all the detail. And essentially, I made the claim that there are 2 key characteristics that a game needs to have in order to be considered a roguelike. I'm not a person who likes the term roguelike. Well, I do like the term roguelite, but I think it applies to different games than what people typically apply it to, but we can get into all that later. Mm-hmm. But in order to be a roguelike, you need to have a game that has random level generation of some sort. Maybe it's just a room that's always the same, but if you encounter them in a different way, in a different order, that probably counts. But some sort of random script that changes the way that you run through the content.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second aspect, which is permadeath, which does not allow you to carry progression from run to run. So, obviously I could get a lot more specific with what I mean by both of those terms, because I happen to, making a video about roguelikes is sort of weird because, I'm sort of in between 2 camps of people. On the one hand, there are the people who don't really care about roguelikes, and they're like, oh, well, I lose all my progress, and I just
Right.
feel like it's a waste of time. And like they don't really understand what's compelling about the genre. Not that it's their fault necessarily. Like
Yeah.
there aren't very many super high profile roguelikes. Like there's no AAA roguelikes aside from Prey Moon Crash, but I wouldn't even consider that a roguelike. But we'll get into that later. But so there's those people. But then you have the super hardcore roguelike fans. And these are the people who are still playing games like NetHack and
Right.
Angband and all those old ones that I find interesting, but I have problems with that I won't necessarily get into today. But those are the people who say games like Spelunky or The Binding of Isaac or most of the roguelikes we've been talking about, they aren't roguelikes, they're roguelites, because they are not like Rogue. Because Rogue is a top-down dungeon crawling game that is turn-based, and
ASCII and,
there's this thing called the Berlin interpretation.
Yeah.
And without going into all the details, it was essentially a bunch of old school roguelike fans sitting down and creating a list of characteristics that they felt made a roguelike. And all of these essentially were characteristics that applied to the original Rogue.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of people say, oh, well, Spelunky isn't like Rogue because, it's not a top-down dungeon crawler. So
Right.
clearly it's not a roguelike. But I think they're wrong because Spelunky is like Rogue in the most important way.
Right.
It's like Rogue in the fact that it has random levels and permanent death. Now, the way that those are contextualized are a bit different, obviously.
Right.
But the most important, any aspect of the original Rogue, you can take away and isolate in a non-roguelike. You can have turn-based games that aren't roguelikes. You can have ASCII games that aren't roguelikes. You can have, a modular design that is not necessarily a part of a roguelike. I'm
Yeah.
forgetting what the rest of the Berlin interpretation is.
There's like 13 rules, right?
Yeah, well, there's like the high-level ones and the low-level ones.
Yeah.
So if you just
But-
give me a moment to
yeah.
pull those
I mean,
up.
inherently, it is a semantical argument, right? Like, you can label
Right.
you label things however you choose to label them. It's mostly about what we societally view as most convenient. But I think the thing that makes roguelikes interesting in a sense is that that roguelikes are every genre in a sense. Like, you have platformer roguelikes, you have top-down shooter roguelikes, you have RPG style roguelikes. Like, I mean, the older school, like, top down, just kind of, I mean, the example I was going to bring up today, which I guess I am, is Powder, which was pretty old. It was designed for the Game Boy Advance and DS, but was released on Windows and Mac. And that one, it isn't like there's any actionable anything. It's sort of the old school RPG style of just like, press the arrow key in direction of enemy and do damage. But it's still compelling in the roguelike sense. So you have platformers, you have shooters, you have all sorts of stuff, and all of these guys are roguelikes because of this like shared thing that makes that drives that gameplay.
Right. Well, and I think you get a lot of people who say, oh, well, there's a lot of different styles of roguelikes, so can you really call it a genre if you have platformer roguelikes and dungeon crawling roguelikes and first-person shooter roguelikes? Can you really call it one genre when there's so much variation?
And it's just a subgenre.
Which I think I would make the argument that you still could call it a genre.
Sure.
I think in like what do we use genres for anyway? I think genre
It's a category or type of game.
is used to categorize games of similar characteristics And generally, it's also used, in a practical sense to inform purchasing decisions.
My
and tell you, what is this game like?
Yeah.
The genre is the fastest way to get an image in someone's mind. And saying roguelike still is valuable because you can say roguelike and people know two things about the game.
Mm-hmm.
They know it has random levels and permanent death.
Yeah.
So
I view it as like I think that people are too quick to not just use multiple labels to attribute to something. I mean, just like a term like action adventure doesn't really, like, it's a useful term in some sense. Like, you can call Zelda an action adventure game, right?
Right.
But people would also hesitate to call Zelda a role-playing game, even though you do in fact play a role and you do in fact level up statistics, right? It just happens to be usually two, a magic or stamina, and then health. But I would say that, you can call Zelda a role-playing action adventure game as opposed to an full-on action RPG, because I would say that those things mean different things, because in action RPG the RPG part's more important. So like Spelunky,
right.
I would describe as a platforming roguelike, because the roguelike aspects of Spelunky are more important than the platforming. You don't play Spelunky to jump on things.
Right. You play it because it is a roguelike.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because it's a platformer,
right?
And you want to, platform.
Yeah.
Definitely. I can accept a lot of variation because ultimately I don't find, the whole genre debate all that important.
It's not.
It doesn't really tell you that much about the actual roguelikes themselves.
Yeah.
It just tells you about what people think. What box should it be put in?
Right.
Should we put it in its own box, or should we put it in like a sub box, or whatever, And I think this whole roguelite, so I guess getting back to the whole, people hardcore fan base, they came up and said, well, these games, they're not like Rogue. They do not deserve to be put in the same box as these old games, even though they share characteristics, they're not like Rogue. I think my problem with it is they just take the term super literally.
Yeah.
Like they take the like and it's gospel.
Yeah.
It has to be 100% evocative of Rogue. Even if it does other things. But anyway, getting back to my point, so they say, well, these games shouldn't be in the same boat, so we're going to call them roguelites, which I don't feel is necessarily fair, but I don't feel, that roguelites or roguelite is not an inherently bad term.
Right.
Because I think that there are games that you should call roguelites, because they're not enough like Rogue. And those games would be stuff like Rogue Legacy, Dead Cells, Prey Moon Crash. Mm-hmm. Those are not roguelikes in my opinion, at least not fully.
Right.
Those are what I would call a roguelite, where they sort of, they have the random levels usually, but they sort of don't go all in on the permanent death.
Right.
So they can like let you bring something over, and that's a big part of those games. So I feel in doing that, it sort of changes the dynamic a little bit, because suddenly, now it's like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't push on with the intention of beating this game. Maybe I should instead push on to farm out some money so I can afford this upgrade, which will help me on future runs. And it changes the whole way you approach the game.
Like Dead Cells.
Yes.
That's
You're
a
like,
really good
oh, well...
example.
Yeah, because it has the whole thing of like cashing out. Like, you can stop now, and get all of your, or like, there's the time where I was in the sewers, and I think there's an upgrade you have to get in the sewer. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, well, I don't want to push on and get that upgrade because I'll probably die.
Right.
and I have a lot of really interesting items, and I want to like get those items into the item pool.
Yeah.
So I made a choice that wasn't, made for like the run I was in. It was made for all the future runs I would be doing.
Yeah.
And like, maybe I should have pushed on, but the future mindedness of that game pushed me to do something else.
Right.
It changes the way you think about how you approach problems.
Yeah.
In a way that I feel makes it a bit too different from Rogue and roguelikes in general. Because roguelikes are all about hanging on from the skin of your teeth, and nothing matters unless you defeat the final
Yeah.
boss and beat the game. Everything is with that intention. All the secrets and tricks you can do, they're all with the intention of getting to the end.
Yeah.
But not so in a roguelite. In a roguelite, you might, intentionally kill a character because it helps you in some way on future runs.
Yeah.
So, they're still valuable, I think. They offer a different gameplay experience. But it's a very different experience, in my opinion, from playing...
Right.
Well, and also another thing about it is when you finally beat a roguelite, like let's say, I haven't beat Dead Cells, but if I were to have beat it, I probably wouldn't feel as fulfilled, because, the reason I beat it was probably because I got better items. I upgraded my health flasks so I can take more hits without being punished for it.
Right.
I increased my damage. I think that's something you can do in Dead Cells.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, it stems
essentially,
back to that sort of RPG grinding sort of design philosophy where it's avatar strength that's making you win as opposed to your actual skill and knowledge of the game's systems.
yes.
Yeah, but I think it's worse, as in, I regard these kind of games like Dead Cells, and that's why I got super bored of it, as just running into a brick wall until you just get further and further because the game allows it.
Well, and the thing is it lets you bypass that essential bit of learning. You can bypass a problem by throwing yourself at it enough times that you essentially have an avatar that is so powerful it is impossible to lose.
Yeah, it just feels like such a tedious waste of time.
I wouldn't necessarily say waste of time, but I think it takes away a little bit from what I really like about roguelikes. Like, when I finally beat Spelunky, it was probably like one of my top 3 most proud gaming moments.
Yeah.
Where I sat up and, this was something that, I had to get through on my own knowledge, and nothing could help me. My previous self, can only help me in terms of experience, but it can't give me a health upgrade or anything. And the first, just I looked back and the first time I played this game, I died, in the first area, several times, and it took me, for a long time I couldn't get through the mines, but then hey, I got good enough to where I could consistently get to the jungle.
Right.
And then eventually I got good enough to where I could see myself growing as a player.
Yeah.
Whereas, I think throwing in these RPG elements, it obfuscates that, where suddenly it's not, oh well, I'm not growing as a player, I'm just grinding out souls so I can level up my dude and then get good enough to win.
I mean, that's something that I sort of am torn on with.
I mean, that's
even
the
a
brick
game
wall.
like the Souls games or something like that, where it's I don't know. It's sort of a weird thing because in a lot of games, these sort of leveling up mechanics are integral to things not just character progression and avatar strength, but I think leveling mechanics work really well when they serve the purpose of making your character more, more different, branching out in different ways through what you choose to upgrade or level or whatever. And I think
Yeah, like
Yeah,
branching skill
and
trees.
I don't. It's been a minute since I played Dead Cells, admittedly. And when I started playing it, like for the first time, like I really, really liked it. And the thing I liked about it is that instead of it being something like a Rogue Legacy, where basically a lot of the decisions you made were just straight upgrades, and it wasn't a matter of like there were decisions as to what you upgraded, but it was like either way you're upgrading something, right? Where in Dead Cells, I felt like the choices that you made a lot of the time with where you spent the money that you earned on different things worked more towards the variety of the experience rather than just making you stronger, which I prefer. I wish it had done more of that. One of the things I like in Isaac, which is sort of a roguelite thing, and this is actually a really good implementation of something like this, something you don't know, it sort of acts more like a secret than anything else, is that in the shop, there's this like little donation box, and you can just throw as many coins in there as you want. It doesn't really matter. Eventually, it'll break. Like if you just throw like tons in there, it'll just jam up and you can't throw any more in. But you don't know what that does until like eventually you put in enough coins throughout all of your runs, and then it's like, oh, hey, this new item is now something that can appear in the game. And so it's not something that makes your character stronger. It literally just makes the game more interesting.
Yeah, and I would argue that, that would still be a roguelike element.
Oh, sure.
I think roguelikes can change. It just changes the way that the levels are constructed from that point forward.
Exactly, as opposed to changing your character or changing every single run from then on out in terms of making it easier or contributing to some macro form of progression.
Right. Like, you still get the joy of, getting better at the game, through your own knowledge and skill. It's not changing any of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's just changing some of the things you might encounter along the way. So it's not really like, like you were saying, it's not an upgrade. So it doesn't undermine that essential reason why I play roguelikes, where I can look back at myself and say, I've gotten better.
Yeah.
And adding in a few new items doesn't, it doesn't undermine that.
No.
Which is great.
Or the example, like in Dead Cells, like I know that both of you weren't a huge fan of, but I also don't think I got far enough to really get to what a lot of your complaints were. But I liked how, as you opened up things in Dead Cells, it was like your runs got even more different because you were going to completely different areas all the time. At least in the opening few hours of the game that I experienced.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not as negative as I might seem about Dead Cells. I thought it was all right.
I'm negative about it.
I think.
I mean, there's got to be a reason why I didn't come back to it, right? Like I loved it when it came out, but I didn't come back to it for a reason.
Right.
Well,
I mean, it's good at first because it actually requires skill, but then it just gets so boring because you have to go through the same stuff over and over. And the only reason why, sometimes it's your lack of skill, right? But just the way the game is designed is you're getting those better weapons and more health over time. So it's just a natural, like, gatekeeping that your skill could otherwise make a better experience, I guess.
Well, and I would also complain about some of the other aspects of Dead Cells' design. I don't think it has particularly interesting level design. And that contributes to the sameness of the runs. Like for instance, there's like that one area, I can't remember what it's called, but like, it's like this sort of outside area, has like a purplish vibe. I like the promenade or something.
Yeah. It's one of the early areas.
It's like the first area you can get into. And it has like...
Yeah, second area in the game, I think.
It has like the same starting like level layout. Like, there's like the first little area and it's always the same. And, just going through that, it feels very samey. A lot of the level design is really just... It all boils down to just like there's different planes and there might be enemies on some of the planes and then you fight them and then you move on. Like
Right.
the actual like level design space doesn't really affect how you approach any fight. It just sort of changes where the fights are.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at something like Spelunky, the terrain affects those fights a lot, because you might say, oh well, I can jump down from this enemy to this enemy because of where they're located, because movement, at least platforming movement, is a lot more important in that. And so and also fighting can change the environment. They're like, you can use bombs to defeat enemies, but then an enemy might move in an unpredictable way and it blows a hole in a place you weren't expecting to blow a hole. Or there are some enemies that like explode, or you can use some enemies to defeat other enemies, or it all ties back into the level design, I think, in a lot more of an interesting way
Yeah.
than in Dead Cells. Because Dead Cells, it's fundamentally like fighting is pretty much the same. There's some stuff that breaks it up, but you're just like on a plane. Sometimes it's a bigger plane, sometimes it's a smaller plane, but you're fighting a dude, and typically he's if you're playing the game well, you'll be in a situation where he's like alone or no other enemy can really hurt you, because you can sort of control combat in that way. You can also sort of cheese combat as well, where like you throw down your like little thing, like your little items, which I would always go for the one that like shoots the guy instead of like an automatic cannon. So you could just like throw that down and cheese them and just like sit there, and it'll slowly kill them. They will definitely die from it, but
Right.
you're not in any danger. So I think that's sort of some other problems with Dead Cells that isn't necessarily tied to its cell mechanic.
Right.
And it gets into some of the weeds of other aspects of roguelike design, which, roguelikes are a super diverse genre, and I could go down so many rabbit holes
Yeah.
in terms of that, but we're really running up on
3 hours.
time. 3 hours.
It was a good 3 hours though.
It was very good. We talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Well,
A lot of stuff.
I guess if we're just wrapping it up, thank you so much for coming on, Chariot Rider.
It was great coming.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll have you again. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, if you ever need someone to talk roguelikes, or other parts of game design, because I also do, more than that, strategy games, which, I'm surprised that there aren't more people talking about strategy game design on YouTube. That's one thing I'm sort of like disappointed about is, there's a lot of people who talk about like action games and like, making a satisfying action system, or like, they'll talk about writing. There's a decent amount of those, but there's not many people talking about, how do you make a strategic system that is interesting to interact with. There's not that many people who get into those weeds, because there are some definite weeds there that need to be explored.
Yeah.
But like, there's not that many people exploring that.
As if on cue, I'm getting a message from a Discord server that Liam Triforce is in, and the new Fire Emblem's out.
Oh yes,
today, as of recording.
Yeah, I
this.
saw that.
And apparently,
fantastic.
It's good. So,
I've been thinking about this. I've never played a Fire Emblem game. I might enjoy it, but also I'm not like super into the whole anime aesthetic.
Play the old ones. Play the GBA ones.
That's what I was thinking.
The one that I
played
was the Sacred Stones, which was really fun. It has it has a few really BS missions, but I think that's kind of the fun of it.
Right. Well, I mean, I was talking about emulating Mother 3 earlier, so it shouldn't be that hard to just throw the ROM into my emulator and play some Fire Emblem, because I think I would enjoy Fire Emblem.
Yeah.
So I'll probably be checking that out, and if I really enjoy it, maybe I'll have to get the Three Houses game.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
We'll see.
There's some other strategy games I've been playing at the moment.
Definitely.
I've played a little bit of the Wii one, Radiant Dawn, I think it's called, and the DS Awakening. but I never finished them. I've even started playing, I think, both titles twice from the beginning. I just never finished them. I guess Fire Emblem's just one of those series or franchises that just gets so big that you just don't want to touch
Radiant Dawn is like painfully long. Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Like I think it's like the longest Fire Emblem by like a country mile. I mean, I could be wrong because I haven't played it and beaten it, but I remember. I don't remember who was talking about it, but I remember someone that I was talking to saying that, so I'm just gonna believe them.
Yeah. Well, and like Fire Emblem isn't even my favorite Nintendo strategy game series.
Advance Wars.
I really like Advance Wars.
It's such a shame that we didn't get like most of them.
Yeah. I want more Advance Wars games because like the last one that came out was for like the DS, I think.
Yeah.
It was like that Days of Ruin, which I haven't played it, but I played a bit of the original Advance Wars, and then the big one I've played is War Groove, which technically is not an Advance Wars game, but it is very heavily inspired by it, and I absolutely loved War Groove. I think the whole Advance Wars system is very unique in terms of strategy games because for one, there are no random elements,
right?
But it's still very interesting.
That's good. That's cool
to go through the campaign, and it does interplay, I think, really well, and like it forces you to like think about your army composition a lot and figure out how to leverage the unique strengths of each unit to defeat your opponents, because that's very important.
Yeah.
And then like the whole dynamic of the less health you have, the less damage you do. It's a lot of fascinating elements that comes together in a really unique way. So honestly, like stop giving me more Fire Emblem. I want Advance Wars. It's the series.
Stop investing in successful franchises. It's annoying.
Honestly, like more novel, new ideas. Come on.
Like even with Luigi's Mansion 3, it takes place in a hotel. It's not a mansion. So the title is just wrong. They're playing off of the franchise rather than... Well, they could just call it Luigi's Hotel if they wanted to. Yeah. Instead, they're trying to tack it onto a series that it doesn't need to be tacked onto.
Well, and for the record, I don't necessarily have anything against the Fire Emblem series. I've actually played a little bit of the Game Boy one on like a browser emulator, because those are a thing apparently. And I've played like the first mission or so, and it seems interesting from what I played. I just like only did like the first mission,
right? And
it did the whole thing of like it's essentially rock paper scissors.
It is.
But then like there's like several layers of rock paper scissors because the melee.
There's a melee rock paper scissors and a magic rock paper scissors.
Well, and like isn't ranged also like ranged is outside of the whole rock paper scissors thing, and that's actually sort of part of strategy game design that is sort of important.
Yeah.
It's called an interplay loop, or at least the person I'm familiar with who coined this concept. He calls them interplay loops, which actually like Smash Brothers has a really good example of an interplay loop, but
the shield grab
we're 3 hours
attack.
in.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll save this for my own video.
Yeah.
Talking about interplay loops.
Maybe we'll have a part 2 if people want.
Yeah, if people really want, I will gladly come back to the podcast, even though I am not a Last Life member. I have many lives, much like a cat. I have 9 lives, so...
All right.
Yeah, and there's like I didn't get the time to say half the stuff I wanted to say, so maybe we'll have.
Oh yeah, we all left behind many threads. I'm very easily distracted when I speak, so I go down many rabbit holes that I probably shouldn't.
Rabbits.
I'm gonna get a pet rabbit. That's gonna happen.
Nice.
That's my.
Just cut off its foot.
No.
How else are you gonna be lucky? You only have one life. Where are you gonna get that luck factor from?
Horseshoe.
He's gonna get the eggplant.
Well, then you have to kill a
gonna
horse for
abuse the
that.
secrets
Yesterday
of
was
his one life.
yesterday at the time of recording this, or actually not yesterday because now it's past midnight. It's actually past 1 a.m. Eastern time.
Not for me.
But on Wednesday it was National Tequila Day, and there was a tequila bottle that we got. I was with a friend, and she got a tequila that had a horseshoe on the front of it. So I'll just get the tequila, the horseshoe bottle, and I'll have a horseshoe, and it'll be good. It's a really roundabout way of saying I don't want to kill a horse.
Okay. I was wondering where that was going.
It went where it went.
Well, you can just start a farm with horses then.
Hell yeah.
Become a farmer.
That sounds great.
Rabbit and horse farmer.
Exclusively.
Oh, that's true. The rabbits and horses can live in harmony until the rabbits get trampled.
On that tragic note, we'll see you next time. I don't know who's gonna do the podcast next.
They're gonna
but,
eat all
you know,
your
that's the fun
rabbits
part of this podcast. You'll never know who's gonna do it.
Or carrots.
You never know what's gonna come.
I meant to say carrots.
You never know.
Rabbits eat carrots.
Carrots are actually not that healthy for rabbits.
Really?
They usually
Well, they
eat like
eat them.
leafy greens.
Well, that's good because that's
Yeah, it
healthy
is.
for humans too. It's kind of like with pandas. Pandas are the most stupid animal because they eat the most unnutritious thing, the bamboo. They have to like eat all day to get any nutrition.
Yep. Like if we left them on their own, like they would kill themselves because
They're as dumb as bricks.
like it's just natural selection. For some reason they have not found a good way to get nutrients, so they just eat these super inefficient bamboo shoots where like most of the energy in them is just wasted, and they just have to eat all day. It's ridiculous, but they're cute,
It's
so
like
humans
celery,
will pour
weird.
millions of dollars into keeping them alive, as opposed to other species that could also be benefiting from those millions and millions of dollars, and probably are more valuable for the ecosystems that they're found in.
Probably. I don't know much about that. I can't comment on that, but
Probably.
Kill panda bears,
Anyway,
everybody. Have a good night.
probably.
With that note, kill the pandas.